Okay. As always, have to try to see if OBS is working. Let's try this as well. Maybe.
Usual strat.
Okay. I think my audio is working. I think it is. Okay. Now time to try and get people to watch. Hi, hello, everybody. I'm gonna be trying some new things here. As you can see, I've got a little sending stone at the top there. Maybe I can make that a little bigger. Maybe. How does it look? I think it looks good there. I think it looks all right. I'm gonna try out a few things here and there and everywhere. Hell no, I ain't watching. Why not? Why not? Why not? Why not? Why not? Come on. Wait, what else are you doing, Pone? What else are you doing? It's just you and me. Come on. It is. It's all working. Okay. I love making things work because it's always great when that happens. It's always great when things go on time. I'm gonna be trying a few other things as well in regards to, like, maybe I'll put like some like banner or something up. Don't exactly know yet. I'm trying some things here. Ooh, that's probably way too big. Let's go just 100 flat. What's 100 flat look like? And I want to fill it with. You know what sucks is, like, I feel like a lot of the other YouTubers, they all have like the brand going. You know, how's it going, Andrew? Hello there. A lot of the other YouTubers have their brand already going on in regards of they've got their icon, their imagery, their sort of, like, you know, style and theme, but I quite frankly haven't had that. I just straight up haven't had anything of that sort. I don't really have a brand, as it were, and I feel like that's actually really important, but it's just something I gotta work on. And something I gotta work on real hard, real quick, because I feel like I could potentially try and do something here. Yo, you, sir, have been my latest binge. Good stuff. Thank you, Insane Arbiter. Thank you. For those of you just tuning in, if you hadn't noticed, my dear and near YouTube compatriot, Steely Sam, gave a shout out to my channel. And that video, I think, got like 100,000 views. So I got a trickle of some new people showing up to my channel, which is awesome. A ton of people just showed up, and I got like literally like hundreds of views in the span of the last 2 days, or hundreds of subs. I've got 100 subs, and I've gotten like thousands of views. Go with the flow. I wish I knew how it all works so I could do it. That's the thing, is there is a clear methodology to it. There's a lot of people showing up that are brand new, and they're already killing it. Like, just recently I saw a YouTuber, a D&D YouTuber in particular, who only showed up, I want to say, 4 months ago, and he's already like 60,000 subs, and all of his videos get hundreds of thousands of views. There's some people that can figure this stuff out, and it's not just a matter of figuring the stuff out, it's a matter of actually implementing it. And that's kind of been my problem, is I haven't bothered trying to figure it out, and I haven't been bothering trying to implement it. Try women in bikinis. It always draws in people. So that actually brings up one of my other D&D YouTuber compatriots, Bob Worldbuilder. Recently, one of his shorts just blew up. He made a short, I want to say like 6 months ago, and just recently it hit hundreds of thousands of views. I think it actually hit millions of views. And that video has his girlfriend in it. And wouldn't you know, a video that just goes viral, you know, however much time later, just a ton of terrible comments on that video. It's ridiculous. So many people just saying all sorts of nasty stuff, and oh, I couldn't imagine. So definitely, putting women in bikinis on thumbnails or in videos themselves obviously would get the views, but it comes with a burden to bear. Has a burden to bear. Okay, I'm trying to work on something on the side here. People are awful. Yeah, that's just always the nature of it. People are the worst. People just absolutely the worst. If that doesn't get you or GF to help you, I don't know what will. You're telling me. Or doing videos in your pool. That's the funny thing is, so me, I as a perceived male, I do video in my pool and it gets a few thousand views, but I don't have people writing up nasty things, right? So, it's all well and good. I promise you, if if that was a girl doing that exact same video in that pool, that would have been an entirely different outcome. I do plan on doing more videos in my pool, by the way. I want to do a video where, I hold my breath underwater to test my constitution and maybe do some, testing my swim speed and stuff like that. I've got a few ideas in mind. How are you doing, No Fun Allowed? You know what, Luke? I am doing fan-frickin-tastically. Things have been going up for me. I've been getting a lot of subs and views and likes and great stuff on my channel. In regards of my gaming life, I've been running a ton of one-shots for my Discord. I've been running my standard games, and it's been great. It's just been a fun time. After White People Taco Night, I have questions. White People Taco Night. White People Taco Night. I'm trying to think. I'll be watching. I have COVID. Ugh, oof. Sucks to hear. By the way, what does no fun allow mean? So, downvoted bring you back to reality. Thanks for keeping me down to earth. So, basically, at one point, I was running a bunch of games for a bunch of different people. And at one point, to dial it back here, I had a lot of people that you could call a little bit zany, a little bit, out there, as it were. And every once in a while, some people would just try and say or do random things in their games, or in our games. And I would say, no, you can't do that. I think one of the examples from the start was oh, can I do a double backflip and do this and to hit the enemy that's all the way over there using this one feature? And I'm like, no, you can't do that. It was something ridiculous. And basically me saying no to a few of these ridiculous things led to some people saying, no fun allowed, no fun allowed. And then when I started to go make my YouTube channel, I asked around to several of my friends saying, hey, what would be a good name for my channel? And I had a huge list of names. I had names like Save or Dice, Roll For, a bunch of other things. And one of the things I had on there was No Fun Allowed. And consistently, when I went to each individual person, every single one of them said that No Fun Allowed was the best name for the channel. So, yeah, I think it was meant to be. Hello from Argentina. Hello from the United States. How's it going, Manu? Have you had COVID? No, thankfully, I have avoided people like the plague. I have been very fortunate. There is technically the possibility that I got COVID, but if I did, I would have been so asymptomatic that it didn't matter. I personally don't have any adverse effects. I didn't lose any, taste or smell or anything of that sort. So I can't personally say I've had COVID. I've been diligent in ignoring people. And honestly, this whole COVID thing has been obviously it's got its downs, right? But one of the ups has truly been if you like just adhere to like the social, norm of ignoring people, then you get sick way less often. If you remember in the before days, before 2020, people used to get sick all the freaking time because all the time you're rubbing up on people and you're like literally feet away from them, or not even feet, inches away from them, and you're touching door handles and you're touching things, and you're doing all these things and you don't really think about it, how unsanitary it is. But these past 2 years have been the most healthiest I've ever been because I've been ignoring people. It's been pretty great. White People Taco Night is a TikTok meme. It's basically the most American version of taco. I am soft shells, ground beef, Jared salsa, and taco seasoning packets. I'll tell you what. I have not perused the TikToks, so I'm not up on the memes. I may look young and pretty and spry, but unfortunately I'm just not that, not that hip, as it were. What am I drinking? I am drinking agua. There's just water in this cup because I drink like a racehorse. Excited for, I have COVID. Yeah, that sucks, Jesse. It sucks. Excited for Strahd game this weekend. They're meeting the big guy for the first time. Heck yeah. Strahd's always a great time. My entire family got COVID and I still avoided it. Hey, there you go. You just gotta ignore people. I was born in COVID, molded by it. You were merely erased. Hopefully people wash their hands more now as well. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely like one of those things of 100 years ago when whatever the frick it was, not the Spanish flu, but whatever it is you want to call it. I'm sure a lot of people were a lot more like health conscious for a little bit, but eventually over time people are just going to go back to the norm. People are eventually just going to go back to going to getting sick every once in a while. So, so let me start this thing up here. So, this is a live Q&A, so ask your questions and I will answer them. But if you have any particular thing you want to talk to me about, then hop into my Discord, which I will provide a link for right this very moment as I click these buttons to do the thing, as I generate the link and I press copy. So, if you join my Discord and hop in that waiting room, I can drag you over to a private channel, and you can ask your hard questions, and I will answer those hard questions. I'll answer them. So, something important about me is when it comes to answering questions for all of you guys, for the questions that are, like, oh, how do I deal with X, Y, and Z? I am not going to tell you what you want to hear. I am going to tell you what you need to hear. If you tell me something and I'm picking up something, I'm going to give it like it is. I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I'm not going to try and, beat around the bush, as it were. I'm going to say, hey, like, here's what's up. And I think that makes me a much more honest and better friend, telling it like it is versus trying to paint a picture that isn't necessarily there. He made us meet Strahd in session 1. I did, in fact. I absolutely did. Now about those drow. Polo, I think it was. I'm starting Chris Strahd next week. Thanks for the notes, no fun. No problem, Melinda, no problem. Strahd was definitely a love child on this channel because, my god, did I make like 52 videos on it, 51 videos? And that was a clown fiesta. Thank you so much for helping me run Curse Strahd. My party is about to go to Yester Hill at level 9. Any ideas on how to evolve to make it challenging for them? They are getting overconfident. So what I'm here to tell you is, so I'm not gonna go into spoilers right this second. So so any of you who hear Curse Strahd, don't worry, I'm not gonna go into spoilers. But I'm going to tell you, Anthony, as at level 9, that is when the game really starts to take the dive into epic heroic fantasy. And there's very little to threaten the party unless it's overwhelming force. And what I'm here to tell you is it is okay to throw overwhelming force at your party. It is perfectly fine to absolutely just hit them left, right, and center with all sorts of, numbers, with high-level monsters, with magics. Hit them with a lot, because they can take it. and that's okay. You know, I think it also really comes down to what kind of Curse of Strahd that you're running, because some people run a Curse of Strahd where it is just death and despair. Some people run a Curse of Strahd where you are epic heroes who go into a dark land but then bring the light. Play into the theme of the game that you've been running so far. Are you running a game where they are bringing the light? Are you bringing a game where, or playing a game where they're constantly getting beat up on? You know, work to that strength and just accentuate that. Tell it like it is. I'm wanting to unofficially convert Curse of Strahd to Pathfinder 2e. I personally prefer the system and have found the group that likes it as well, and I dislike their adventure paths compared to Curse of Strahd. Yeah, so I'm not against Pathfinder. I know that there's sometimes friction between the D&D community and the Curse of Strahd community, which I think is always totally... Why did I say Curse of Strahd? I think it's sometimes bunk between Pathfinder and D&D community, which I think is bunk because... You know, they are ultimately two different game systems. Specifically, Pathfinder 2 is a lot more different than the others. And, you know, what I'll say is, while I like some of the things about Pathfinder, one thing I don't necessarily like about Pathfinder is the adventure paths that range from a ridiculous degree. Some of the adventure paths, you look at them, and they're just a lot. You know, I don't want to have to read 400 pages to run an adventure, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes I just don't want to do that. Like, small adventure paths are perfectly fine, but then you got the big ones, and the big ones are just, mamma mia, there's a lot going on with that. One of my friends is converting Tomb of Annihilation into Pathfinder 2e, and what I'm here to tell you is, it's actually relatively easy to convert, you know, D&D to Pathfinder. Relatively. But the thing you always have to keep into consideration when you are converting any sort of adventure to a new game system is the implications behind the adventure. Now, what do I mean by that? So, basically, if you were to take a look at, let's say, original D&D's adventure paths, or adventure modules, you have the classic things like the Keep on the Borderlands, and, you know, I'm trying to think of some ones people would know, Isle of Dread, and, I mean, I'm trying to think of, like, the adventure modules that a lot, like, would be kind of famous. But, regardless, you can take those adventure modules and run them in 5e, and it works. Right? Like, you can say, okay, there's 5 goblins in this room. Guess what? In 5e, there's now going to be 5 goblins in this room. That's easy, right? All right, the trap in old D&D, it would allow reflex save, or else you took, you know, 2d6 damage. All right, in 5e, I'll do the same thing. But the real implication is how the system worked. If you looked at old school D&D, if you got hit... You couldn't just nap off the damage and then wake up the next day, you know, peachy. If you took damage, you would regain 1 HP back every day. Or, depending on the system, maybe it was like, you know, 1d3 HP. Maybe it was you would actually only just get your hit dice, you know, when you took a long rest. You know, there's a lot of different implications. So, when you take a look at the exact same adventure, but running it with 2 different systems... it's going to have a different outcome. Even if you convert, you know, X, Y, and Z, the way the way the system plays is different. Pathfinder 2 and 5e play almost similarly, right? Almost. There is some, you know, there's some major stark differences in regards of how the adventuring day goes on. One big one, my friend is always harping on, is specifically in Pathfinder 2e, there is a meta currency that you can expend to prevent death. If you are about to die, then you can say, hey, DM, I use this meta currency and I don't die. And that's a really, really interesting thing because depending on the tempo pace of your game, you could theoretically always have this meta currency to prevent death. And, you know, does that mean that, you know, how does that work exactly? You know, if you want to run a deadly game. You know, those are always questions you always had to ask of, like, what you want out of the game. I'm running Call of the Netherdeep as my next campaign. That is something that I want to make a guide on because I do like that adventure. It's a very solid adventure, and of course it's got that critical role, you know, thing going on. He killed my character. I I killed the bejesus out of your character, Pone. You had it coming. There's one adventure path that throws a cockatrice at the party level 1. Cockatrices have a chance to inflict the slowed status effect on every hit. Slowed cuts the number of actions you get per stack. That's the kind of stuff I dislike about APs. Yeah, so... You know, it always just comes down to, like, what does the adventure mean? What does it mean for the, you know, system? Because, once again, you know, if I throw 2d6 orcs at a 5e party, then they get into a fight, but it's all Gucci because the next day they're going to wake up all, you know, peachy, right? But then, you know, running a different game system, they go against 2d6 orcs, they might be feeling that, you know, they might be suffering from that battle for a long time. And that could lead into the next set of, you know, adventures. He killed a druid and became a bard in my summer of games. Heh. You know, sometimes people gotta die. I know that there's a lot of, like, I specifically get a lot of people that show up to my games, and they tell me that they've never actually felt threatened, or they've never actually had a PC die. And it's tough, you know, because I feel like a lot of people play these high, epic, pulpy adventures, but I know for a fact that me as a player, if I played in a game and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that my PC was going to make it out always because the DM is soft or because, you know, the adventure is just written out to be extremely weak, I'm not going to enjoy it as much. Like, if specifically if I'm in an adventure where, like, lethality is like supposed to be there and nobody dies, then it feels, or no one even comes close to dying, it feels off. And I as a player can see that, right? Like, if I, as a player, go up against a monster, and the monster acts in such a way that makes it so that, you know, it doesn't, you know, facilitate threat. Like, a beholder doesn't float up so it doesn't get hit by melee. The dragon just casually just stands there as it tries to recharge his breath. The, you know, insert X, Y, and Z. I always find that I just genuinely get less enjoyment out of the game. There is no way to remove slowed short of level 3 spell. DMs don't kill characters. Players kill characters with their decisions. I will contest that purely because there is vindictive and terrible DMs who go out of their way to kill characters. That is a thing, right? Like, the rocks fall, you die is, while admittedly a meme at this point, there is DMs like that. Like, I've definitely seen and heard of DMs that purposely say, okay, because you walked in that room and because you didn't make a perception check, you automatically get hit by this thing and it pushes you into this other thing and you're dead. And, like, literally, like, no potential for any sort of, like, repercussion. Like, there are DMs like that. But for the most part, I will say, if you're running a game where you as the DM are acting as the referee, then yeah, absolutely. Players will get their characters killed. But there is, you know, the slight outlier of the bad DM who goes out of the way to just be mean. I'm alright with difficult game. I mean, I'm a Dark Souls player, but when things get unfair, that's when I have a problem. That cockatrice is the first fight in a string of 5. Yikes. It's possible for every character in the party to only get 1 action per turn instead of 3 after the cockatrice fight. That's unfair when you're going into 4 more encounters after. Yeah, that definitely sounds like... That sounds like the implication of that combat was supposed to be a thing of it purposely nerfs you, or it's supposed to be like a thing of like the PCs get beat up and then they get healed later on. It doesn't feel like something that's like supposed to be there for a permanent number of time. It seems like a strange inclusion. So yeah, as a friendly reminder, yeah, just hop into, I just posted the Discord right there, join my waiting room, and then I can take you in, and you can ask your hard-hitting questions, because I want to answer some hard-hitting questions. I want to hear them. I want to hear what's up, whether this be DM related, just tabletop role playing game related, whatever it is. Whatever it is. Do we just hop in voice chat or something? Yeah, just hop in that waiting room. How's it going? This is No Fun Allowed on Sending Stone. You are up. Go ahead and
Hey,
send
no,
it.
we ran a couple of games. I mean, you were the DM for the what do you call it? It was the Candlekeep Mysteries. I was in a
Yes,
couple.
your name was not on at that time.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, I just had a quick question about well, I mean, frankly, I've got tons of topics. You know, I'm a pretty avid D&D player, play it all the time. So one thing that I wanted to get your opinion on was so one thing that well, first off, have you tried out one D&D? How many games of that have you run? And what's been your experience so far?
I have not tried one D&D myself. I do plan on trying some stuff out. I'm pretty interested to see what actually is going on there.
Yeah, because I ran it on I guess it was Saturday night, and my experience was it was pretty similar, right? Um, I remember watching Trey Monk's video where he was saying, "Oh, this is totally 6E," but ultimately, I mean, to be fair, my experience with D&D is I started with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons when I was growing up, and then I jumped from that to 5e. So for that, those two different those systems feel very different. So for him to be like, "Oh, this is 6e," I'm like, it doesn't feel that different. It feels pretty much the same.
Absolutely.
Uh,
It's interesting, too, because when you look at any other tabletop role-playing game besides D&D and Pathfinder, when you move from one edition to the next, the game is barely changing. A perfect example being good old-fashioned Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu is now on 7th edition, and the only things that's changed is, like, the numbers are bigger, but they still mean the same thing, and they added, like, one or two more stats.
Yeah,
And
I think in general, yeah. I can think of some other examples like Warhammer Fantasy, the third edition. They totally overhauled it. They added in some new
and
dice, but
and from what
I
I
think in the
heard, it
mid two
wasn't well
thousands,
received.
yeah, in the mid 2000s, people and late early 2010s, that was the 4E time as well. So people were trying out new things, game designers, I should say. One thing I would say is I guess one example that I would have is one flavor of D&D that I really like is more like a gritty, something like even Curse of Strahd gives you some flavoring of this. But I've been really active in the Dungeon Dudes community, and they have a live play called Dungeons of Drakenheim, which is urban fantasy, gothic, cosmic horror. Very gritty, and human centric.
Totally not
And
Mordheim, City of the Damned. Absolutely.
yeah, well, yeah, it's basically yeah, Mordheim 2.0, I guess you could call it. And one impression that I got from reading one D&D is that I mean, I guess my first experience with this was when I got into 5e. There was a race called Dragonborn, and me coming from AD&D, I never even had the idea of like, oh, you get to play as a guy with a dragon with a breath weapon. Like, of course, for me as like a level 1 character, I'm like, that's insane. He gets that, but you see that it's maybe not the strongest as far as balance goes option, but setting that aside, just the fantasy of walking around a world with people with dragon heads, and now with this with one D&D, you also have Ardling, so it's going to be a base assumption that yeah, and this happens in something like Curse of Strahd too. Like, have you ever started running Curse of Strahd and somebody's just like, oh, I'm playing the Tabaxi, and so I'm going to be like the cat person walking around Barovia, or even like a Dragonborn. There's some ways that you could weave it in with like the Order of the Silver Dragon or something like that. But overall, it feels a little that the base assumptions of the game, and of course, it's not a huge change, right, for one D&D. But just has that been your experience, or could you comment on that?
Yeah, so 5e is definitely pushing itself in the direction of this high fantasy, and I know that doesn't agree with everybody, right? I know
Right.
some people want a game that is more grounded in a gritty world. Some people want a game where the party is humanocentric, and at most there's maybe like one or two people who aren't humans. I know there's some people that want to run a game where it truly feels special to be something that's not the norm. Because as of right now, in my personal experience, there is like, every other person's playing a tiefling or a triton or a tabaxi or, insert
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z, right? And I find that with repeated use, things aren't as special anymore. But I think that's fine for some people. Yeah, it just really comes down to what is the norm of the game.
Yeah.
And I think that is where the issue is. D&D can literally be anything, but a lot of people just typically quickly look at the base rules and just always assume that that is the norm. When if you want to run a hardcore, gritty game, you could say, hey, everyone has to be humans. You can't play any of the other races, or oh hey,
Yeah.
no artificer, or hey, no X, Y, and Z, right? But because a lot of people show up to the hobby and a lot of people just see the rules that are there, a lot of people just assume that the rules are not only the norm but the standard. And
Hmm.
that's sort of a thing that I feel like we should break off when it comes to new players. We should tell them, hey, like, what is going on at one person's table isn't necessarily what's going on at another person's table.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think in general, everything I've seen online is, oftentimes you'll hear about, oh, so and so is, toxic or gatekeeping, but I haven't really seen too much of that. Um, I would say in general, having a lot of options, I think what you're talking about, where it should go table to table, where all the options exist, but here at this table for this game, we're going to be like, okay, we don't want any, and you might even be playing something like, Spelljammer. It's like we don't want any humans, we want only like alien races. So I think that's a fair way to do it. So it's definitely. Um, I know you're an advocate for trying out new systems, but I do think it is difficult for somebody who comes into this game and for a game that you've played for years, all the rules, and it's hard to say, hey, go do something else. I and of course I'm not saying that, I'm not accusing you of doing that. I'm saying that in general,
Yeah.
you often hear that in a community, where they're like, oh, if you don't like Ardlings in your game, go back to playing, OSR or something, grognard.
There's two things people hate. People hate change, and people hate the way things are. Right.
Ah,
And what I
fair enough.
typically find is people will resent change a little bit more. Just a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if are there, I guess one thing that you've tried out several systems. Ultimately, though, I don't know if it's a product of content creation. Maybe it's just something that, like, hey, but it does seem like you always circle back to D&D, and I wanted to get your take on that. I think a lot of people, like, I've tried, you dip your toes in other systems, but I don't think I've ever had a consistent group where it's like, hey, we're playing, you know, um, I've played Monster of the Week quite a bit, but and even whole campaigns where you do like, I guess I don't know if you call it a campaign. It's more like 5 episodes. Each of them feels like an episode, right? But yeah, I, I, I just wanted to hear your take on that, just because you've tried out other systems. Would you ever think that, hey, D&D at some point will be on the back burner, and I'll be playing, I don't know, Traveler or something as my main game?
Yeah, I've experienced multiple times in my not just YouTubing, but also specifically my DMing, GMing, judging, whatever the frick you want to call it, career, where D&D has been on the back burner
Yeah,
because I truly do find that me personally, I would honestly get burnt out if it was just nothing but 5e all day every day. Even in this, theoretical universe 2 years down from the line, when we get all these new rules on one D&D, and there's like now books and books of optional rules, even with optional rules, it's still specifically going to be 5e, and I personally would get burnt out if it was just nothing but D&D all day every day.
that's
And
true.
and while some people try to push D&D to be the one, let's make fun of the terrible naming scheme here. Some people try to push D&D to be the end all be all. Some people try to push D&D to fit everything. But quite frankly, D&D just can't do everything. There are some things other systems can do infinitely better than D&D, and that's a good thing.
I
D&D
agree.
does what it does well, and you should work to make D&D do it. You shouldn't work against D&D to make it do something else that something else could do better. And one of the always go-to examples is, of course, Call of Cthulhu, because Call of Cthulhu can fulfill that, horror and dread and fear a lot better than D&D ever could. Looking at other games, I'm looking at my list here. I'm looking at Astonishing Swordsman, Sorcerer Hyperborea. That one can fit a pulpy Cthulhu world better than 5e could.
Sure, yeah.
I'm looking at a whole bunch of other game systems, but like, just work with the system to make it the best thing ever. And when you want to try something else, don't try stretching it, because you're gonna feel like Bilbo spreading too much or not enough bread over too much toast.
Yes. Yeah. So as a corollary to that, I'm curious, did you see Dungeon Masterpiece? He's Baron Darab. You did an interview with him. Did you see his video today on
yeah, he he was actually bragging to me about how good that one was doing, in fact.
Yeah. Yeah, I was curious, because it gets me thinking about the future of D&D. I think one thing that he mentioned was that potentially, if people are getting into the hobby now, and that becomes like the standard that they expect, and they don't want to jump over to say Mothership or any number of RPGs, because they don't want to imagine it in their heads. They want the tabletop experience where they can see everything, and. Well, that's now that you just mentioned where it's like, hey, you can't, homebrew D&D to be everything. I wonder if, like, what if 5 years down the line, if it's not 5e at that point. At that point, it's just D&D. That seems the direction that they're branding.
Yep.
It's just D&D. Releases, say, the horror 5e player's handbook or something like that, where it's got new rules with like no death saves, but ultimately the core mechanic is still the 6 stats down the line. Roll d20, roll high to resolve, but you take out things like death saves, or you drastically reduce hit points, or you give specialized skills to more facilitate like maybe a modern, because there have been hacks of D&D like d20 modern, or even something like Gamma World, where you do, and Ravenloft, you do wildly different tones within 5e, and I wonder, because I do agree that it to some degree it is healthy to have a bunch of different systems that do very good things, but I wonder if let's say the nightmare happens that Baron Darab talks about, and D&D becomes like the one ring to rule them all. Do you think, could you see something like that where D&D has a bunch of hacks that are built into this tabletop?
I mean, I could certainly. I mean, that's a tough one, because I feel like Wizards of the Coast doesn't want to fall into the trap TSR fell into, as I'm sure you're probably aware of, and for all the viewers.
Yeah, in the late 90s, TSR was basically printing books just to keep afloat, and everyone they lost money on continuously because nobody was buying them, and they were like, let's print 20 books this year, and nobody would buy any of them.
And I think that could potentially be what would happen if they tried making D&D the end-all be-all. Because, let's face it, not everyone's going to get the horror, D&D experience. Not everyone's going to buy the, the sci-fi happy-go-lucky experience. Not everyone's going to buy the X, Y, and Z, right? They could easily, add all these supplements here and there and everywhere and pump out books and, pump out 20 books a year. But I think that Wizards of the Coast is probably smart enough to not fall into that trap. And even if they were, let's say, dumb enough to fall into that trap of making 20 books a year, then I still, once again, I feel like they're still just, if trying to work with this core mechanic just still isn't good enough. I think that they're once again, there's just something that just be done better elsewhere. Once again, harping on Call of Cthulhu here. The D100 system is not something you could easily just all of a sudden slap into D&D, because if you slap that into D&D, then D&D is no longer D&D, right? And
that's fair.
And there's a whole bunch of other game systems that do certain things a certain way, and I just don't think that it would be healthy for both. I don't think it'd be healthy for D&D. I don't think it'd be healthy for Wizards of the Coast, and I do not think it'd be healthy for the consumer if basically this future came about where Wizards of the Coast is trying to pump out, supplements to try and fulfill every niche so that you don't have to go to any other system.
Yeah, I mean that's true, but especially because one thing with TSR was that it was all centralized, right? And with D&D, you have a very robust community. You have something like DM's Guild, and I'm sure they'll have some sort of equivalent to sell your maps that you made on the new. I don't know. I don't even know what the new. What is it? Something Beyond.
D&D Beyond.
Whatever the new VT. Well, what's the new VTT called?
I can't remember.
Anyway, yeah. I mean, I could imagine maybe it ends up really saturated, but that's because there's. I'm just saying it's different from TSR printing 20 modules a year to Wizards printing I don't know 3 books a year, and then they have their DM's Guild where the community makes 50,000. I don't even know how many things are printed to DM's Guild or Drive Through RPG and stuff like that. But I mean, there's so much stuff out there that there's stuff that hardly anyone has bought. And no shade at those people. It's just and I'm not saying that's unhealthy either. I'm just saying that I don't think it'd be out of the realm of possibility. I mean, I'm not putting down money. I'm not saying that's what's gonna happen, but I think that I wouldn't be surprised if this is just the beginning of it's the beginning of what do they call it? Late stage capitalism, I suppose. Not to get political, I suppose. But, and again, no shade. Everything I've seen from 1D&D, it's a good product. When I first tried out 5e, me who grew up on AD&D, of course I was like, ugh, yuck. But then I played it for 3 hours, and I was like, actually, this is better. And nowadays it's hard to go back, much to the chagrin of my father, who I've run him through a couple of 5e campaigns, and he's like, we should go back to AD&D. And he starts running that, and we're all like, Dad,
back in my day, we had retainers.
Yeah.
We had that torchbearer.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that definitely you go back to are the rules are very inconsistent, right? There were no skill checks in AD&D. And so basically just whatever happened, whatever the DM said happened. And drawing maps, that was another thing that I remembered growing up, that we were expected to. Of course, Dad got us into D&D when I was 10 years old, so he's just like, all right, Ben, I'm going to describe this. And he's like, Ben, you drew it entirely wrong. Let me draw it. Just kind of the opposite.
I said it's a 20 by 20.
Yeah. I said octagonal. Do you not know what an octagon is? You're 10 years old. Anyway. But just those are kind of the things that spring to mind when I definitely think about the future of D&D. What's on the horizon. But overall, I'm positive. At first when I saw the Ardlings, I was like, oh come on, furry bait in the core rules. But the more I think about it, the more it's like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. It's the more I realize that D&D is so many things to so many people, I think it's totally fair to have a very universal system where anybody can play. If I want to be in my world, elves only live to be 400, which is the standard in Dragonlance, by the way. Everybody who's playing Dragonlance, you better remember that elves are short and they only live to be...
All dungeons are optional, right? Your players don't have to go in there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What I'll say is, man, I had a crash or something on my... Here we go. And so what hey. All right, I think I'm back online. So what I'll say is, in regards of, without going into any spoilers here, one, setting up the precedents with your players on what kind of campaign it is. Is your Curse of Strahd going to be a super duper hardcore meat grinder mode where PCs can die if they sneeze in the wrong direction? Or are you going to run the kind of game where so long as they do the right thing, they'll come out ahead? Or any modicum of degree in between. You need to seriously talk with your players about what your expectations are of them at the table, because if you just run a game, you literally don't do any sort of session zero, you don't tell them anything about the campaign, you just say, hey, I'm going to run this game, let's go. Then every single player at the table is going to show up with different expectations. They're going to treat the game differently. And some of them, unfortunately, may not appreciate the kind of game that you are running.
Okay, and I basically last night I talked to all of them because we were going to run out of the abyss, right? But then I was doing my research yesterday, and there weren't enough resources for me to run it. As my first module I've ran is Rime of the Frost Maiden, and I just ran that first session Saturday.
Heck yeah.
So I was like, I am not running anything where there's not YouTube videos and guides for me to look into and research.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And I was like, look, these are the 4 that they have a whole bunch of. So you guys can choose these 4. So, it just so happens we all chose Curse of Strahd. So,
solid
my
choice.
main... right? So basically, I set them down, and I was like, I was looking into this module. It's really hard. I was told to run modules as is, because I'm a new DM. So, I'm modular DM. I'm not brand new. I wouldn't go out for this if I didn't have the experience, right? But I told them, hey, based off of what I've seen, heard, I'm just going to have you guys make 3 characters to start out with. They're all going to be level 2. We're just going to start out with everybody having 3 characters. Is that me insinuating something, or me just...
Well, yeah, so it is absolutely insinuating, but the best part is, if you go into that campaign and say, hey, you make 3 characters because things could get hairy, even if things don't get hairy, they could still be thinking in the back of their mind, like, okay, we just survived the first session. Does that mean, like, the next session's going to be harder? Does that mean the next session's going to be harder? What's around the corner? Why did you make us make 3 characters? Because, you know, if I'm running a happy-go-lucky Sunshine and Rainbows adventure, I'm not going to tell my players to roll up 3 characters because, you know, the worst the players are going to get into is a battle with, you know, cotton candy, right? But if I'm running a game where people are expected to die, then I'm going to say, hey, you know, just be aware, you know, have a backup on the ready because you could die at any moment. People are going to approach the game with a different mindset. And I think that's a healthy thing. I think it's perfectly healthy to, you know, play the Sunshine and Rainbows game where you expect nothing to happen. And I think it's perfectly healthy to show up to the hardcore mode engage campaign where you expect people to die.
Okay. Because I didn't like verbally tell them, but last night I was messaging them, and I was like, hey, I've looked this stuff up, and this thing you guys want to do is really hard. And if you guys want to do it by the book, you need 3 characters. Like, point blank, have 3 characters. We're doing point buy. You can min-max, you can do whatever, but you need to have 3 characters by the start of session 1. So.
Yeah. I think it's perfectly reasonable.
Okay. Next question for you. This is more of a personal question. I'm not necessarily spoiling anything yet. I'm going to wait to ask those more depth questions later on when there's less people in.
Alrighty.
What level should I start them at for the old bone grinder? Should I start them at level 1, 2, 3, where...
Yeah, so what I'll say, without getting in any spoilers of Curse of Strahd, what I will say is, if you actually read it, there is a sort of level kind of guide to it. And basically, I assume you're running Milestone. I'm right.
Yeah, they level up by chapter.
Okay, so what I'll tell you is, running it by chapter may not exactly work because Curse of Strahd is truly a sandbox. Curse of Strahd is not a campaign where your players absolutely go from one chapter to the next. That is not how that works. Curse of Strahd is definitely your players are in this land and they could potentially go anywhere, do anything at any time. So that may not be the best solution.
Well, So should I do it? Because the way I'm used to leveling up, like you play, and I'm not saying I'm gonna make my players do 5 sessions then they level up, but that's how I've done it. You play for like the first levels, like 2 through 4. You play 2 sessions, you level up. Level 5 and beyond, 5 sessions, you level up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm do, like I said. But I'm not necessarily going to do that with them. I'm going to, like, be reasonable. I'm going to kind of follow the milestones throughout the book with leveling up. And if I see the potential, like, they're ready to level up, or it's starting to get hairy and they need to level up, I'll have them level up. Like, I have that intuition. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So, but in leveling up, it's kind of where I'm a little less iffy when it comes to modules. Because I don't know when to say, okay, you're leveling up for next session.
Yeah, so
You know what
depending, like the newer modules in particular, they definitely have kind of like a thing of when your players do exactly this, they level up. The earlier editions, or not earlier editions, but specifically the earlier modules in the 5e lineup do not have that. A lot of them kind of have a general vague outline. In fact, actually, if you read Curse of Strahd, there's actually references to XP, which, once again, not everyone uses. So it's definitely a thing you have to kind of feel out and look for recommendations. What I would personally tell you, though, is my personal leveling experience for Curse of Strahd is it involves the deck. It involves the reading, and a lot of the leveling stems from that, is what I would say.
Okay. Yeah, because I haven't actually, like, I'm using resources that I'm borrowing. I'm actually buying the book on Wednesday because I don't actually have the physical book.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah. So, but the book kind of guides you when to level them up, right?
Curse of Strahd, not as much, no.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Oh, my next question. So, this one is going to go to Rime of the Frost Maiden. What towns would you recommend for level 2 characters? They're a party of 5.
So if you have watched my guides on them, I kind of go into this. I go into a rant every once in a while about the level design of the first few like quests and towns, because some of them are just flat out not fun. Some of them are just straight up like a level 1 party will get killed, a level 2 party will get killed, and then like it's a little bit wonky. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, and it's tough. It really is.
I was thinking Cold-Hearted Killer, Bremen, and Brinchander.
Yeah, that sounds like a decent lineup.
Okay. Thanks. I'll let you get somebody else.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
No problem, no problem. Alrighty, let me get caught back up on chat. We got Jessica. Hello from Germany. I'm watching a lot of your videos for the Rime of the Frost Maiden. Big thanks. Big thank you for that. I hear it the night before I'm running. That's why I made them for that. Basically the quick DM prep, as it were. Hey buddy. Hey Tim. Hey Fireman. I have tomorrow the starting of the final of my first Rime of the Frost Maiden group. I love this module. Ran 4 groups and all have another history. Heck yeah. I'm using events for level of Curse of Strahd. I have a bunch of specific things that can complete to earn a level. Heck yeah. Actually, it does say when you level up. It's funny. I literally read Curse of Strahd cover to cover. I made, like 50 videos on it, which equals however many hundreds of hours of content. And, like, it's still, like, every once in a while you forget something. Oh, hi! Found your channel just weeks ago, and it helps me a lot DMing Tomb at the moment. Thanks for that. No problem. 5. Awakened Mammoth and 2 Winter Wolves. Yeah, that's a great way to kick off a campaign right there. Great way. I send them from Bremen to Targos to Caer-Konig, Caer Dynevor, East Haven. Just binged Icewind Dale series. Your guides make prep so easy. Thank you. That is why I do them, because there is a lot to prep. There's a lot to look at, and it is infinitely better to have another set of eyes and a voice talking about these modules than just having the one. You know, these modules that we read for 5e in particular, these things are anywhere between, 100 to 300 pages. And there's a lot going on, So it's always good to, like, take a little snap of, like, okay, let's look at this little, little entry there. Oh, hi, Jessica. My German is not on point. Nice to see that 2 of the 7 of people here come from Germany. Wie geht's? What do you think about the journey? The journey. It entirely depends on what you mean by the journey. Wie geht's? Let me do. As a friendly reminder for anyone joining in, you can hop into my Discord and you can absolutely join on in and ask one of those hard-hitting questions. You can absolutely lay it on me, whether that be related to D&D, tabletop role-playing games, how you would handle a certain situation with your group, whatever it is. I'm here. I'm here for it. Oh yeah, for real, using your guides really helped me, my Cursed Strahd game. We're getting close to the end now. My group's halfway done with the Amber Temple. Strahd is trying to kill them. Hey, Strahd's got to do what Strahd's got to do. Oh, Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. Yes, that makes a lot more sense. So I'm currently running Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel right now through my Discord. Sorry, it's late here now. I don't know why I didn't pick up on that. I've literally... To ruin the visage that I've got going on here. Boom. So I've got Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel right here. And I've been running them. I've been running the bejesus out of them. And I've only got like 3 more left. And I'll be running them fairly soon. If you join my Discord and pay attention to my YouTube, you can absolutely find out when those are coming out. How's it going? This is No Fun Allowed on Sending Stone. You are up, QWERTY.
Oh, snap. I wasn't ready. Okay, I'm ready.
Alrighty. So what is up? Lay it down.
Well, okay. So I'm wrapping up Curse of Strahd. I just mentioned that in the chat, but I'm really debating on what to run next.
What are you looking for in a game?
I'm trying to just have a good time with my friends. So I'm just debating between like Frost Maiden, Witchlight, Journey Through the Radiant Citadels, or stringing something together with Candlekeep.
What I'll say is, out of all of those, so Curse of Strahd obviously is a bit more sandboxy. If your players want to continue that sort of sandboxy feel to the world, then I would recommend, specifically Icewind Dale, Realm of the Frost Maiden. You get plopped into a nice icy region, and you gotta go out and explore and go against the elements and all the dangers found therein.
Interesting. I was debating also Witchlight because they think they want to do phase stuff, but I think they also want to do a lot of combat, which from what I understand, they can really miss out on in Witchlight.
Yes. What I'll say is Witchlight, Witchlight you can absolutely do a bunch of combat, but I think what really makes Witchlight shine is specifically the social interaction with all the NPCs in the world and overcoming the obstacle of combat through other means. You can absolutely convert it to having combat, yes, but I think that Witchlight is definitely reserved for a game where you want to sit down and not get your hands dirty, as it were.
All right, very cool. Thanks, man.
No problem.
I'm gonna head out, but ciao for now.
Alrighty, thank you. I'm trying to figure out how to prep my run with Frost Maiden Crystal without stressing out. Any tips on this? Should I focus on the one I'm running that week, or prep both at the same time? So me personally, what I like to do is, instead of trying to prep for something like, trying to predict the future, as it were, with my prep, after every single session, before these people fly off into the sunset, before these people run away, I immediately sit there and say, hey, what are you guys going to do next? Even if I think, even though they're basically right about to open up the door to the ancient temple, I always like to ask them, hey, what are you going to do next? Because every once in a while, they will surprise you. And nothing's worse than sitting there prepping a bunch, and then your players not following through with it. So what I would say is always ask your players, hey, where are you going next? What are you planning next? And that'll get them thinking about what they want to do next. And more importantly, for you as a DM, that'll get you ready to prep exactly what you need and not having to prep extra. So that is my advice on prep. In Icewind Dale, if the players summon the Tarrasque on... I don't want to say that out loud. Just in case he's... might be a little bit of spoilers there. Stopping... So, what I'll say is the Tarrasque is the most meme monster in the entire game. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The Tarrasque is the most memed up character. Because the Tarrasque in reality would truly be devastating. But because we have the internet and we have people that can be like, oh, a level 2 artificer can kill the Tarrasque. You got groups like that. It's a bit memed up. The Tarrasque in reality would be able to take on a lot of creatures. And simply put, how the Tarrasque would do that is the Tarrasque isn't stupid. If there's something flying and shooting it, the Tarrasque would just pick up some rock and throw it in the sky. Even though it doesn't say on the stat block that the Tarrasque can throw a rock, the Tarrasque can absolutely throw a rock. It doesn't say that Tarrasque can jump up in the air. But the Tarrasque can absolutely jump up in the air. It doesn't say that the Tarrasque can, burrow underground. But the Tarrasque can absolutely burrow underground. So never just rely on the stat block alone of a monster. Think about, in practicality terms, what the monster can do. And, start getting your creative juices flowing on... why is it that the monster is written this way? Why is it that... What implication does the monster have in the world? And does it make sense? I'm watching it all. Good night. Thank you, Jessica. I'm having a lot of fun with the Witchlight. Yeah, I'm having a ton of fun too. I had a ton of fun with it. I ran through it all. It's been great. Playing through that right now, having a blast. Heck yeah. The Tarrasque, big meat shield, just saying. Yeah, so, going on a little bit more about the Tarrasque. The Tarrasque is just... A lot of people just have these assumptions that the Tarrasque, someone with a bow and arrow could kill the Tarrasque because the Tarrasque doesn't have anything ranged on it and you're not shooting magic at it, but absolutely not. The Tarrasque could level a building. The Tarrasque could, literally destroy the environment. The Tarrasque could just simply burrow under the ground and ignore... anything, and if you chase after it, then you're screwed. It is what it is. 5. My question for Tomb. I'm DMing a group with no healer and no utility spell so far, just brute force. They love their characters and hate NPCs joining the group for help. Sounds hard, but it's their run. So, is there a question in that, or are you still writing? I'm afraid that they won't make it through Omu, and I don't know how to help them without being too cheesy. I mean, that just comes down to... I wouldn't even say group composition, right? I truly hate having to show up to a table and be like, oh, hey, we have to have a healer. Oh, hey, we have to have the tank. Oh, hey, we have to have the X, Y, and Z. I don't like that. I find that makes D&D far too gamey. when D&D I truly find is the best when it's not feeling gamey. Now, specifically in this scenario here, how does a group that has no healer and no utility spells, that refuses to hire on NPCs, deal with a tough challenge? And at that point, what I would strongly say is just, you lay in the bed you made, right? If you don't want to have NPCs join the party that could help you out, then you're getting less help. If you don't want anyone if you literally are going to tackle a trap with your bare face, eventually someone's going to get hit in the face. Is what it is. And I think that's perfectly fine. I think that adds to the verisimilitude of the world. Because, unfortunately, what I think may be potentially happening is, I don't know your players for certain, but I think there might be this thing going on in their brain where they're saying, hey, we're going to make a group and we're going to tackle the world, and we expect our DM to come up with a solution. And the fact that you're asking me that question makes me believe that, right? Because you are asking for a solution to the problem that you didn't create, your players did. And I think it's fine for them to handle their own problems that they made. I love my characters. Whenever I make a character, I don't want them to die. But at the same time, I'm playing in a game where I expect to potentially be killed, because then that adds to the enjoyment of the character. You know, you appreciate the candle that burns twice as fast, right? So my solution here would be to offer them one last chance, one last, thing of, hey, there's an NPC here and they could potentially help you out. Oh, hey, there is a faction you can side along. But if they refuse to do so, then that's on them. And if anybody dies, then instead of playing the role of the sorrowful DM who didn't bend the world to facilitate a power fantasy for your players, instead I would play up the role of a referee and say, hey, I gave you a solution, you didn't take it. That's the end of the story. Revivify scrolls, yeah, that's not gonna work. They're gonna die. Revive doesn't work. I have played in one-shots with nothing but bards or nothing but barbs. Each time they made it through okay. Players trust you. They did session 0. They chose not to have a healer. They deal with the consequences. Yeah, so it's always one of those interesting things of, does the world truly revolve around the players? If you run a game and there is no rogue in the party, is there suddenly no locked doors? If you're running a game and there's no wizard in the party, is there no more magical spell books in the world? The list goes on and on. And sometimes you purposely just kind of forget those things exist. Sometimes you run a game where the party never gets a magical spell book because there's no wizard in the party. And it facilitates a better time for, everyone else to get exactly the magical items that they want. And sometimes you let there be true verisimilitude to the world, and they get items that don't help them out. This happened to me recently because whenever I run, I truly do make it random. And I remember one time I dropped a wizard-only item for the party that had no wizards. And that was actually really cool because the party then questioned, okay, is someone going to try and become a wizard now? Maybe someone can try and learn some spells, become a wizard, and use this, make it useful. Or they also think that they're thinking of is maybe we just try and sell it, or maybe we give it to our friend. Those add some fun, unique things that I truly find that the tailored loot just doesn't provide. Whenever there's the tailored loot in the party in the game, it always just feels a little bit too gamey for me. When we go clear that warehouse full of bandits, and the monk gets those monk wrappings that are perfect for the monk, it just feels just like too unreal in a fantasy game with dragons and goblins. Of course, that feels that's the unrealistic part, is the finding of the monk wrappings or whatever. And it just comes down to the style of play that you prefer. Are you the kind, forgiving, and all-abiding DM? Are you the judge that simply presides over the game? Are you the referee that lays out the law and or lays out the rules, and you adhere to both sides? What kind of DM are you? What is your DM style? And that'll really help you infer on how to run the game. Basically, coming to terms with who you are. There's some other things I wanted to do as well. Did this actually work? Okay, the backdrop worked. Ooh, that one-on-one DM talk came out kind of ugly, didn't it? I don't think it came out too well. Yeah, it did not. I'd have to clean that up later. But I think I want to add like another sending stone on the side here. Can I make a second one? Oh! I hate when you're moving stuff around, you click on something. No! Gosh darn it. Thank God for Control Z, am I right? Let's make this a little bit smaller. Alrighty. I am a memeing DM. I run nothing but dragons. JK, JK. Truly, the Dungeons and Dragons experience of you go into a dungeon and you fight a dragon every time. It's so interesting to think about the course of D&D in its history of how it came about and where it's come to now. D&D has truly evolved into something absolutely spectacular, and it's great. It's awesome that D&D has come this far from the beginning. For those of you that don't know, D&D it started off as a war game where it was literally just, monsters on a gaming table. The modern equivalent, of course, would be Warhammer. And then slowly it started turning into, hey, instead of controlling massive units, let's control individual people. And then instead of having these individual people fight on the field, let's have these individual people, let's explore their daily lives outside of battle. And then instead of them going into battle against, hordes again, instead they're going into a dungeon. That's such a cool progression of the hobby. I would truly love to see the spark of turning, Chainmail, which was the name of the war game, into the tabletop role-playing game of D&D as we know it. That would be awesome. You should let the players fail and succeed on their own. You tell the story, make the world. The players turn your story into life. They make the faults and perfections. DMs just learn just as much from their players as the players learn from them. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You're it's always a learning experience. You don't always learn exactly what you want to learn, but sometimes you learn what to do and what not to do, right? Sometimes you learn that something works awesomely, and then sometimes you learn that sometimes it just doesn't work out that well. What the heck did I just click? Oh, I see. I see. Oh, interesting. I just got told a unique take that, like, Sigil, or specifically, the Planescape could become, like, the standard, basically, setting for 5e, which I don't think is going to happen. I think that Wizard of the Coast is so ingrained with the Forgotten Realms and specifically the Sword Coast. I do not see that change happening anytime soon. Who's your favorite NPC from Curse of Strahd? Okay, my favorite NPC from Curse of Strahd would be... Irina is just like such an easy go-to, right? Irina is just such a classic. I think Irina is a little bit too easy of a go-to, though. So, beyond that, I would actually say Strahd's Brides. I think Strahd's Brides are absolutely a blast to play. I'm DMing for 7 level 14 players. Any cool monsters to throw at them for interesting encounters off the top of my head? 7 level 14 players. Oh, God. Any interesting encounters? Any cool monsters for interesting encounters? So, I'm always just a fan of the Beholder because the Beholder really throws the players for an absolute loop. You know, it shuts down a lot of the game plans that a lot of groups have come to know. No more spell casting from the spellcasters. No more swing sword from the swing sword people. Like, even a higher level party, 7 level 14 players, would, you know, be struggling a little bit against the Beholder. You'd have to buff up the Beholder, or more importantly, what I would do is just add a bunch of minions or mechanics to the lair with the Beholder. Because that would be an interesting change of pace for the standard combats. Blinsky is no fun. He's no Blinsky. What do I think is the perfect session length? I started 25 years ago with kind of 24-hour sessions with candy and soft drinks at my friend's house. Cut them 8 hours, now about 4. Yeah, so obviously when we were young, when we were kids, we could sit there and play all day, every day, right? But unfortunately, as we get up or grow up, life gets in the way and ruining everything. I'm anywhere in the camp between 2 to 4 hours. I'm anywhere in that camp. It comes down to the kind of tempo of the game. Like, what does the game feel like? There are games you could run where it feels like an episodic show where things kind of bundle up nicely in 2 hours. And that's awesome. And then there are other times where you need 4 hours to really fully experience a really strong arc of the campaign. So I'd say anywhere between 2 to 4. I'm typically, right now, for my home groups, I'm running 3-hour sessions. My players love the Bride of Strahd. Heck yeah. It's like, hey, DM, I'm casting a spell on the big bad evil guy. Cast Polymorph and turns them into a fox. Learn this from players and use it for the day of big stupid heads. Bluto the Drunkard. Absolutely. Yes, Strahd's Brides. Same wavelength. Yeah. If you haven't checked it out, I made a video on... a kind of video on them. I gave them all their own personalities and gave them voices and stuff. Are we cool? Curse of Strahd spoilers? I never know how much to divulge. Yeah, so just due to the nature of my channel, I cover a lot of the DM stuff, and and because of that, like, I've got some people that are Curse of Strahd players, and then I got some people that are Tomb of Annihilation players, and so on and so forth. So I never like going into hardcore spoilers here because I know that there's some people that haven't played it yet or playing it right now or whatever. So I personally would recommend not you saying exactly, here's exactly what's going on in this scenario. I prefer that. Thanks for inspiration and help. Good roll to all you lovely people. It's 2:18 here in Germany, and I have to go to work in 5 hours, so good night. Good night, 5. Beholder colonies are rough. My players just went nuts in Vallaki, so I'd love to tell that story. 2 Beholders got it. JK. I fought a Beholder. I was the only one that passed the saves. 2 of the 3 left turned into stone because no con. Beholder colonies are like 6. Some tips for running Curse of Strahd during the daytime. Do you think this matters? So I assume you're referring to daytime in the game because I assume that's the case. If you're running Curse Draw, if specifically your question is daytime in real life, then just put up the curtains, is what I would say. But if your tips for running Curse Draw during the daytime, very simple. Cloud coverage. At all day long, every single day, there is cloud coverage in all the lands of Barovia. No sun. Doesn't matter. It's gloomy. It's miserable. Yeah, it's brighter than the day, of course, but that just means that the nights are even darker. Something to always, so one thing I always strongly recommend for setting the scene is using the 5 senses. You've got sight, sound, feel, touch, and taste. More often than not, your players aren't tasting things, but sometimes there is a taste in the air, right? But specifically for sight, sight is a big one. And really sell that your players can't see much. Okay, as your players are walking down the street or walking down the road, there's a thick mist, and you can only see maybe 60 feet in any direction. Like, it's the middle of the day, but there's heavy clouds overhead that are dark and gloomy. It's a little bit drizzly, and there's a mist, and you can't really see that much. You know, that really tells a tale. I find that when we're looking at, like, maps, you know, because we're typically looking at, like, a top-down version of the map as our players are traipsing around the world, we kind of forget those little things, right? We forget that our players can't, you know, maybe forget about the cloud coverage, maybe forget about the light, maybe forget about the precipitation in the air, maybe forget about the smells, maybe forget about these things. And it's good to remember them. Have I ever run a hex crawl? I'm interested in running one for my group, but I haven't quite figured out the balance of random encounters while on the road. Any tips? Yes, I have run a bejesus amount of hex crawls. In fact, dingo. So here is my tip on balancing the game. Don't. Simple as that. So balance is this, you know, term that gets thrown out all the time, and it means so many different things to so many different people. What is balance in your game? Are your players expected to get into fair fights? Are your players expected to always be able to win? Are your players always expected to get into a set number of encounters? Is that the balance? Here comes the sex bot. There goes the sex bot. So what is balance, right? Balance is something that you have to discuss with your table. Is balance even there? Is balance there? That is going to strongly infer the type of game that you're running, and is going to strongly infer upon the world. If there is a balance, that means that the level 1 party simply cannot come across, 20 bandits armed with crossbows because the party's going to get destroyed, right? If there is no balance, then there's the potential for the level 1 party to go up against 20 bandits, and they would get slaughtered if they didn't, do something, right? So what is balance? That is something you're going to have to ask me. Or if you want me to go into more about your question right there, you'd have to tell me what is your idea of balance. But I would first ask myself that question, and I would ask my players that question. What is balance at your table? Now, just got here. Sup, no fun. Sup, House DM. How's it going? Fellow YouTuber here. So for balance here, what I'm here to tell you is 5e just doesn't do balance well. Because it doesn't matter if you get into 20 encounters today, because tomorrow you wake up and it's almost like nothing happened. The only carryover in all of 5e, the only thing that makes it feel as if you got into like some sort of engagement on the prior day is hit dice. You only get half of your hit dice back. I don't know how many groups are running a game where hit dice is important. I don't know. I find that a lot of groups don't have that issue. I find a lot of groups don't have the issue where They have to carry on with their hit dice again and again and again. So 5e just natively isn't the kind of game where you're supposed to get bogged down in a hex crawl. I've ran a 5e game where it was... here were basically the house rules of it. 1, short rests are 8 hours. A long rest is a week, meaning that you cannot long rest out in the wilderness. It's impossible. You would absolutely get interrupted. Your long rest would be bunk. It's worthless. So you can only short rest out in the wilderness. And even then, you could potentially get ambushed, right? Number 2, lingering exhaustion. If you go down to 0 HP, that's 1 level of exhaustion right there. Boom. So there is a penalty to getting hit, or to getting knocked down. And then, because of those 2 things combined, because you can't long rest out in the wilderness, and because you get exhaustion when you get knocked down, there is a consequence to failure in combat. And that is where the balance of the game came in. That is where the balance of the game came to the head of, hey, if we stay out in the wilderness too long, we're eventually going to get got. So we have to do as much as we can, and then we have to head back. I personally don't balance my random encounters because I don't want balance in my game. I want to have a verisimilitude to the world. I want my players to know that they're not just playing a video game. I want players to know that they're playing my game. So, I could absolutely go into in-depth detail, Dingo, but you'd have to tell me what is your idea of balance, and then I could help you out by crafting some balance. Personification of the spooky stuff really helps. Horror atmosphere, wind moans, tree branches, reach for players, cold bites, etc., etc. You really need a mod in here, no fun? I'm way too small to need a mod right now. I'm good. I'm way too small. Just got here. Yep, sup. Lingering injuries, exhaustion. Yep, all that fun jazz. Yeah, don't balance anything. Tell your players they will die if they don't run. Yeah, so there's a number of things on that, right? My games utilize short rest more than long rest. Long rest only happen in towns, villages, cities, and proper inns. They also cost gold, yeah, for a long rest. Absolutely. So I am of the camp of, the old school DM mentality of the dungeon wants to kill you. The dungeon is not there for sport. The dungeon is not there just simply to be pillaged. The dungeon is there to kill you. And that is where the random encounter table is great. I tell my players straight up, hey, I'm rolling d6s. On a 1, a random encounter is going to occur. And I roll for every, X increment of time that they're in the dungeon. Depending on what type of dungeon or environment that they're in. That could be every 10 minutes. That could be every 20, 30 minutes. Every so on and so forth, right? And that labels me as the fair referee. I'm not playing this vindictive DM that's out to kill you. I'm not playing this, hardcore evil DM that is just creating this hazardous world. I'm playing the referee of, here we go. You're going out in the wilderness. I'm going to run things purely as written, as they are written here, and let's see it. If you guys can, overcome it. Because if you can overcome it, that's cool. I think balance is maybe the wrong word to use. Let me try again. When you run a hex crawl, do you have random encounter on every hex? And in your experience, does this bog the game down? Yeah, so that also comes down into, balance may not be what you were intended here. Though the information on balance was very informative. Thank you. So, what kind of game are you running, Dingo? I'm like grilling you here. I'm asking you 20 questions here. Are you running a game where in this hex crawl is your players are going to remember the hex crawl for like a fun reason? Or are you running a hex crawl where they're simply trying to get over all these hexes and each hex represents a danger that could potentially kill them? So there's a number of ways you can run it. In fact, I think I really want to like try and bring up some sort of like visual cue here. Sometimes you run a hex crawl where it's only like 9 hexes, and you just explore each one, and each one is fun and engaging. And then there are other times where you run a hex crawl where there's like 100 hexes, and like only a few of the hexes are important, and you're just trying to get from one hex to the other, and there's danger along the way. So 5e natively gets bogged down with combat because combat is natively slow in 5e. Just the nature of 5e. 5e has slower combat because there's a bit more moving parts, there's a little bit more interactivity. You've got your action, bonus action, reaction. You've got to read through all the spells. 5e is a little bit slower. Let's be honest with ourselves here. I think it's perfectly fine. Depending on the game that you're running, if combat is on the table, then why would you take combat off the table? But if you're running a game where you just want to get to the fun bits of the hex crawl, like, you know, your players are just going from one hex to the next hex and they get to the exciting place, then yeah, I've got no issue with it. But if you are running the game where it is, you know, you're hex crawling around and you're trying to crawl your way across and it's just, you know, it's a little bit of a slog, the slog is part of the experience. You know, slog sounds, I guess, derogatory, but that's not necessarily the case, right? Like that's part of the experience of, oh yeah, as we made our way from town to the mountain, we got ambushed by a bunch of, I don't know, goblin riding wolves, let's say. Like, oh yeah, you know, this was just a totally random encounter, but, you know, that was cool that we had to overcome it because that was the price we had to pay for going over the wilderness. Right? But just, it really comes down to the kind of game, tone and feel, and theme that you're going for. I've ran hex crawls where it is just simply you move from like it's a 9 hex little flower and it's nothing too big. You just go from the middle to like left, right, and you just show up to the nice fancy place. And I've ran hex crawls where you have to just literally crawl over, you know, dozens of different hexes to get to the exciting bit. And in the middle of that, you've got to fight your way through whatever I roll up. I mean, in 5e, what else is gold good for? Yeah, 5e doesn't have a gold economy. 5e was not made for town construction like old school D&D was. Old school D&D, the idea was you get gold to, 1, level up, because that was the only way to level up is you, 1, you get the gold, and then 2, you spend the gold by hiring a trainer. But then 2, you build up your own keep, and you build up your own lands, and you use a lot of gold for that. 5e just simply doesn't have the gold economy, so it's kind of worthless. Gold has become very nebulous in my game. We use a Call of Cthulhu-style credit system since the party is stupid rich now. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that 5e, like a lot of times people run it, you don't need gold. Gold is worthless. Once the fighter gets their plate armor, like, what else is gold good for? But how do you do spell slots and class fleets? If you do it to where they get it back every dawn or short rest, I mean, they will run out of spells and class resources before they run out of HP. Yes, so for the one example that I'm going to bring up, Melinda, the one where you only get resources back, or you only have a short rest 8 hours, long rest a week, the spellcasters would eventually burn out. The spellcasters eventually lost their spells. Eventually, basically everyone would lose all of their features over time because you would not be getting a long rest. And that right there made the game so impactful because classes that normally do not get to shine got to shine. And one of which, in particular, my favorite class in the game, Fighter, truly got to shine. If you look at every single class, spell feature, or classes, spells and features and whatnot, a ton of features come back on a long rest. The Fighter, however, gets the majority of their features back on a short rest. And what's really interesting is the Fighter gets Second Wind. And Second Wind is a D10 plus their Fighter level in hit points, which in that game, they could get back every single day. Everyone else was burning out. Everyone else was losing all of their hit dice, and everyone else was losing all their spells and all their features. But the Fighter got to continue marching on, and they were strong. And that was so cool to see that the Fighter could outlast everyone in the marathon. It was such a delight to see them shine, because the spellcaster shoots their fireball, and that's cool and all, but eventually you run out of third level spell slots. You know what I'm saying? The fighter, hey, they're marathon. They keep on going. Yeah, if they were using spells constantly and not saving them, then yeah, you're right. Yeah, and that was perfectly fine. That was kind of the point of it. Eventually you get burnt out and you have to take a long rest back in town. Kit Kat, you are on the air with me, No Fun Allowed, on Sending Stone. Go ahead and send it.
Hi. Yeah, so sorry. We're gonna backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
Get the long rest, short rest, because I'm trying to come up with a way to where my players aren't depending on it. Because I am running very sandboxy modules. I'm running Rhyme and Curse of Strahd.
Mm-hmm.
So, they can only show, because I feel like that would be reasonable in Icewind Dale, but I don't know how to do that with Curse of Strahd.
In Curse of Strahd, I think the real simple solution would simply be you can only long rest in the safety and comfort of others around you, i.e. you can only take a long rest in town.
Okay.
And with Curse of Strahd in particular, you could, say this. You could say this like out of character and just say, "Hey, in this campaign, you can't long rest, outside of town." Or you could say, "Hey, in the lands of Strahd basically has a pervasive mist that prevents you from actually sleeping outside." And like literally, it could be as game mechanic-y as that if you want it to be.
Because I already set the rules with my players. I've stated, because I haven't even really started Curse of Strahd yet, I've stated with my players in Icewind Dale, hey, you can only get a short rest out in the wilderness. It's too cold for you to get a long rest. It's too cold for you to relax enough to get well enough sleep to do so. However, if you guys decide to set up camp, and you have them guards, and you take shifts, 8 hours. As long as there's no combat, you get short rest resources. But I'm afraid that might hinder my group, because they've always played to where, hey, if we rest for 8 hours, we get long rest benefit.
Yeah, yeah, so what I'll say is, it's good to shake up the game every once in a while, right? Like, your players have constantly played in the game where they sleep 8 hours and magically they're healed easy peasy. And you tell them, hey, like, this is truly a game like no other. This is truly a game where, you are playing by a different set of rules because this game, like, this adventure dictates that you play by a different set of rules.
Yeah, because I told them, Rhyme is a lonely, endurance, cruel, sorrowful theme. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because I told them, you're not going to be happy-go-lucky, you're not going to be able to do this, and this, and become the biggest heroes of the town. There are going to be towns that absolutely hate you because you helped this other town. Who knows, one day you guys might end up in one of the sacrifice drawings, and you get drawn to be, the sacrifice that freezes on the pole. And I've explained to them, this is not a happy-go-lucky game. But then one of my players was like, okay, so since we're resting for 1 hour in this blizzard, we get short rest, right? And I just hit my head on the table and said, ugh. You suck.
Sometimes when you do something so regularly, you just think it's the norm, and it's okay to give them a gentle reminder and be like, yeah, once again, you can't get a short rest out here. It takes a little bit extra time.
Yeah. So because honestly, in the West Marches server I am, you go out, you do a game, you come back, you get a long rest. Because normally it's a week in between games, but you're in town, you're in your bunks. That makes sense. But, I've never done it outside of this West Marches theme. So. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Alrighty, let's take a look. Been trying to... here. The chat scrolled up a little bit. In Witchlight, I tried to do a hex crawl. I had them roll a d20 every 2 hexes and add a 15 plus. And on a 15 plus, they would get an encounter. Roll a d8 to see which encounter. I dig it. Been trying to implement hex crawls into my heavily modified 5e games and was wondering what your favorite hex creation kit is. I like the look of hex kit, but not sure I want to drop the cash yet. What I'll say is Incarnate is my go-to map maker right now. And Incarnate is also really great for making maps and hexes. In fact, I'll try and find a picture here of a hex crawl I made using Incarnate. Let me see if I can bring that up somehow. Where would it be? Yes. I think I found a way to do it. I found a way. Image. New. Oh, what a pain. Patreon. Maps and art. Arctic. No. Hex collection. Here we go. Oh, wow. That freaking blew up huge. So this is like an example hex crawl I made. So this is a, pretty... I like hex. I like Incarnate. You can make maps. You can fill them up with whatever the frick you want. In Incarnate, you don't have to adhere to a hex, but you can set it up so that everything does adhere to a hex. Entirely up to you. So that's one of my go-to things. I'll shrink that down a little bit here. Boom. But in regards of other hex tools, I can't recommend any others because I can't recall ever using any others other than just using Incarnate. You need to get a potion of long rest brewed by Rudolph. I'd actually dig that. I made Barovia bigger. Yeah, that's typically what a lot of people do is they just make Barovia a bigger place. I mean, that fog will get you if you rest outside the walls, and those wolves will get you. Those wolves are constantly hunting. Wolves with mobile are 10 out of 10 real wolves. Okay, mobile feet would be a little bit hardcore, for sure. I let my players long rest however they want outside of dungeons for the most part. I don't really feel like fighting their expectations about that by adding mechanics, but I will throw in an ambush. Yeah, so once again, that lays back into the implications, tones, feels, and themes of the game. Once again, harkening back to original D&D, if you took damage, you felt that damage for days on end. And that had real-world implications, right? Or in-game implications, I should say. Because... take for example, the exact same scenario of it takes 2 days to walk from town to go to the dungeon. So we have the old school D&D and then the 5e D&D. We march along. On the way there, we get into a random encounter. And on the way to that random encounter, both of the fighters for old school and 5e take damage. Then... what's going to happen is, in 5e, that doesn't matter because you're presumably going to sleep it off and then continue on the next day to go to the dungeon. But in old school D&D, then you're like, oh man, we actually took some damage along the way there. Are we going to continue along? And then immediately the tempo is shifted, right? Like, so do y'all just go back? And then once you do finally go to the dungeon, like, how does dungeon play work? Is dungeon play simply you literally go into a room, you kill some monsters, and then you come back out of the dungeon, take a long rest, and then go back in? Because that plays into the epic hero, style of play. But if you go back to like the gritty style play, then you can't do that because you're eventually something bad's gonna happen. It's definitely an interesting consideration of what is your expected game supposed to be. Like, how does combat actually implicate the world? Is combat war? Is combat sport? What is combat? Is combat lingering? Is combat scary? Is combat fun? Is combat embraced? Is combat feared? Another very, very important question to ask is, in your 5e games, do players ever run away from the monster? That is something that is a very important question, right? Like, do your players ever run away from the fight? Do your players ever surrender? Is that a thing? And that's an important question to ask. What is the implications of the game? Dan the Magic Man, you are live with me, No Fun Allowed, on Sending Stone. Go ahead and send it.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
No problem.
So the conversation that you're having right now, it seems to me, brought some ideas of Dark Souls, a very Dark Souls-like gameplay loop where you go out of the bonfire, spend some resources, and if you spend too many on the way to the boss, you have to go back to get your healing back. Very similar to, going back to Civilization to get a long rest, to get your resources back, and finally tackle that dungeon.
Absolutely.
So I thought, if the dungeon's big enough, would you not allow them to take a long rest in that dungeon, like, at all? Or maybe, like, have some, like, if they take special precautions to barricade a room or anything, would you let them have it then?
Yeah, what I'll say is this is entirely a case-by-case basis. Sometimes, in a mega dungeon in particular, like I'm talking about like 50 rooms plus, then yeah, there absolutely could be a small nook where the enemies maybe like have forgotten about this room and thus like no random encounter chances. Or maybe the players just simply try to hold up in a room that they recently scoured, and during the night there potentially is some random encounters while they try to take a long rest. It comes down to a lot of things of like what is the game's tempo, right? If you want combat to have that lingering effect, then long rest definitely puts a weird hamper on it because, how do you rule long rest? How often can they try to attempt it? How often, how many encounters breaks long rest? A lot of these various things. And when it comes to dungeon delving, 5e has actually lost the art of dungeon delving. In the 5e handbook, you will see very, very small rules on how PCs are expected to move about the dungeon, but no one ever reads that, and no one ever plays it by that.
I certainly haven't.
Exactly. A long time ago, original D&D, there was the implication of basically every single air quote round, a dungeon round, was 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, you explore the room. In 10 minutes, you go down the hallway because your PCs are moving slow. They're checking for traps. They're looking around. In 10 minutes, your players, check the room for the secret doors, right? And it's always an interesting thing of like how does rest get like how does rest factor in to 5e's dungeon crawl material. And I think the sad reality is I just don't think it does. I think it's just a weird stop and go of, okay, we get into a combat. What's stopping us from the long rest? You know,
It's definitely too much of a big reset. Like you said, it brings everything back to normal, and they're completely refreshed. So I would home rule that at least at my table, that inside of a dungeon, the number of spell slots you get back is limited, or something along those lines.
yeah, there's a lot of great house rules. I've written it up myself a bunch too, but there's the idea of you only get a quarter of your health back, you get a half of your health back, you only get to choose one feature that comes back, you only get to choose a number of spells equal to X, Y, and Z. You know, there's a number of ways you can introduce that, and you know, basically how the way you do it infers how the world works, and also very importantly, it infers how your players are going to interact with the game. If you're playing a game where spell slots don't come back, then maybe there's less spellcasters in the group, or maybe they're extremely conservative with their spells. If you're running a game where health comes back and they get to choose the features, maybe they don't use features at all and they just revert back to using their basic attacks and cantrips, right? You know, it's very important to look at sorts of rules, and very important to discuss them with your players to try and convey the world that you're trying to go for.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
No problem.
All right, see you guys.
Solid idea. Didn't know our Incarnate supported hexes. Yeah, to an extent. You can set up hexes, and it does all that fun jazz. Let me blow this up again here. So like this is an example hex crawl area of, you got the town, and you've got like an adventure site to the north a little bit, and you got an adventure site to the south here. You've got a whole bunch of little adventure sites, and that's this is what I would call the medium-sized hex. I actually kind of want to make a. I'll just make this disappear for a second. No, not that one. But there's a lot of different examples of making a hex crawl, of whether this is just a small little hex flower and you just go from one hex to the next and that's the next fun random place, or is it going to be the world hex crawl of you have to traverse dozens and dozens of hexes, or is it kind of like the regional little hex here of you have your adventure start location of the town, and then you've got a whole bunch of fun little, you know, places of interest around. I find that the middle one is what I'll call it here. This middle adventure hex style. I think that works. Like, gets a lot of people, you know, going with their interest. Solid idea. Didn't know. Care to share some? Oops. Care to share some stories from your current campaign? My current campaigns are going pretty typically. One of my groups freed Tiamat recently, and now they have to fight Tiamat and go up against her draconic legions and the legions of hell. Another one of my campaigns is just them dealing with trying to go from room to room in a terrible mega dungeon. You know, usual stuff. Combat should be the last option. I believe players should use their skills and encounters, not fight their way up. Yeah, it's always a question of, is combat war a sport? I find that with most 5e players, they see combat as sport, not as war. Interesting. Maybe the fact that all my games end up like Quentin Tarantino scripts is on me. Hadn't considered that. Yeah, so, you know, it's tough. You know, once again, looking at the generic basic 5e rules, no homebrew at all, you know, it presents a certain style of play. But just changing up a little rule here and a little rule there can make the game a very, very different experience. And long rests are, in particular, one of the biggest changes you can make to a game's tempo, tone, and feel. Yeah, if they constantly get their spell slots back, Aura Vitality literally ruins the game because of how much healing it provides. Yeah, exactly. I always have a stack of Aura Vitality scrolls on deck. I keep 5 on my character at times and 3 Revivify. OP. My ranger asked me if he could summon dryads to use Goodberry and heal with that. I don't know what to tell him. I said I would look into it. I always fear like the gaminess of the game. I always fear when people try and like get too much out of a little thing. And I feel like that'd be a little bit too much of getting some things out of a little thing. You know, it entirely depends on what is going on in the world, right? Like, so, how is the ranger even summoning these dryads? Is that through a spell? I personally would rule that, like, if you summoned creatures, they couldn't, like, aid you in that regard. But if it's summoning as in, like going out into the forest and, like, beseeching the dryads, then yes, absolutely. Like, yeah, you do something for the dryads do something for you, and then you do something for the dryads. That sounds cool. That sounds like a quest in the making right there of, oh, hey, you know, the dryads are like, oh, hey, we gave you those good berries. Now you got to do something for us. There's some, you know, demonic taint growing on a tree in the heart of the grove, and we need you heroes to save it. Like, that's a quest right there. Boom. Always think of whenever the players ask for something, always think about how you're totally going to use that to ask for something in return. Always. Make them think about their decisions. Make them think about how, you know, people need things done, or maybe things are going to rise up in the future. Always think about that stuff. Oh, goodness gracious. They would use Conjure Woodland Beings 4th level Conjuration. Yeah, I don't like that as much, honestly. Like, because why wouldn't you just cast Goodberry in the first place if you needed the good berries? You know what I'm saying? Oh, you know what? Like, if you're going to, like, if they're going into that, like, if they're summoning multiple dryads and then they want the dryads to summon, like, or to do 10 good berries themselves, then that sounds like that's way too much. That's ridiculous. Also, personally, as a rule, I always ruled that you can only eat one good berry a day. Because good berries essentially give you the nutrients and everything else for literally a day. And so, like, my logic behind that is you wouldn't eat, like, 20 MREs in a day. You'd only eat the one MRE. So, you can't eat all the good berries in a day to heal for, like, a cheap heal that you can have on hand. I never like when, like, the game's too gamey. I never like that. You could do that, but make it a challenge. Make the Dryads have attitude, not try doing it right away. Make them work for the friendship. But if you were to do this Conjure Woodland Being spell, that's, you know, on a wholly different board. But is trying to convince the Dryads for good berries really that exciting? Yeah, especially if you summon them. I don't think it'd be that great. Have I already talked about my thoughts on the coming changes 5.5 1D&D? Well, my first thought is 1D&D is a terrible name for so many different reasons. You know, 1D&D was just a terrible name. It's getting memed to death. It's going to be confusing for people. It's going to be odd. It's, you know, it's weird. It's just such a bad name. I know exactly why they chose the name to be 1D&D, and that is for brand spanking new people. They did not make the name 1D&D for us who know about D&D. They named this 1D&D so that new people showing up to the hobby, brand spanking new, don't know anything about D&D, get told, hey, there's 1D&D there. And because we're all, you know, monkey-brained, we all hear 1, that means it's the first, or it's the best. We go for 1. That's pretty much the reason why they went for it, right? So, first off, name terrible. Now, secondly here, what do I think about the changes so far? I think some of the changes are fine. I know. So let me think about it. Like, so the whole race having no stats, that's whatever. The whole background's providing your stats now. I think that's better because backgrounds were next to worthless in 5e current, so making the backgrounds actually matter is good. Now, the list of level 1 feats, I think, needs to really be worked on because the list of level 1 feats is, in my opinion right now, a little bit just weird. I think they definitely could be using a lot more. And, so that's my first little gripe with that. Now, secondly, the crits. The crits is the one big one I see a ton of people complaining about. I'm going to be making a video on this because I love being contrarian to all the people that saying that they hate the crit rules. I don't hate the crit rules. Here's why. The fighter attacks twice as often as everybody else. So that means that you crit twice as often as everyone else. So that's the quick, dirty, and simple math right there. The fighter attacks twice as much as everybody else. Now, what that means is when the fighter goes to crit with their, let's say they're using, a longsword for D10. Instead of attack and doing a crit with 1d10, they get to roll 2d10. That's awesome! And you crit twice as often. Wow! But, ultimately, other people's crits are better. Ultimately. The cleric casting Inflict Wounds does 3d10 damage. When the cleric crits, that means they do 6d10 damage. The spell casting crits are infinitely better and outpace fighter crits. Because even though the fighter crits twice as often, they're only working with single dies. At best, they're working with 2d6. At best. And the cleric goes and just absolutely just makes you look worthless when they crit with their inflict wounds. When they go to crit with Guiding Bolt, which is 4d6 or whatever. When you'd use X, Y, and Z spell, even though you're only critting half as often as the fighter, it still outweighs the crits of the fighter. And it feels so bad, it sucks. Now, that's like I'm not going to go too far into the spellcasting thing here. The second part of that is the monsters no longer critting. Now, the monsters no longer critting implies that the DM no longer crits because the DM always plays the monster. And I know I've seen a ton of DMs that are like, "Oh, I want to crit. Screw this rule." I saw literally someone commented on my thing that was like, "You will pry crits from my cold dead hands." I personally am okay with regular loser nobody monsters no longer getting crits. I'm actually okay with that. I'm actually okay with the goblin no longer getting a crit. I'm okay with the kobold no longer getting a crit. I'm okay with the bandit no longer getting a crit. I'm okay with the henchman loser monsters no longer getting crits. However, what I will say is, to compensate for that, what I would have instead is the boss monsters crit, and not only can they crit, unlike their henchman counterparts, the monsters, specifically the boss monsters, crit more often. Instead of the bandit captain critting on just a 20, the bandit captain crits on a 19 through 20. Instead of the dragon critting on just a 20, the dragon crits on a 16 through 20, let's say. I really like that idea. Like, I'm perfectly okay with saying that the loser goblins and the loser monsters no longer crit. I am perfectly okay with that. But saying that certain, big, larger-than-life monsters can't crit anymore, that's kind of lame. Now, once again, for people that don't read between the lines here, the reason why monsters no longer crit is because that is a buff to fighters. And when I say fighters, I should say specifically martial classes. So the martial classes, this actually delves back into the previous thing. The fighter gets twice as many crits because they attack more often. But who in the party gets attacked more often? That's right, it is the martials. So crits, once again, are an exponentially unfair mechanic that punishes the martials. Because the martials get attacked more often, they get critted more often. And it doesn't feel good to be crit all the time. Yeah, you make the comparison of, the wizard, if they get hit, then it's bad. It's like, comparing, if the fighter gets hit versus the wizard gets hit, it's always bad for the wizard to get hit. But specifically when it comes to crits, it just feels bad to be like, okay, I'm the one that's suffering the most because I chose to, be a frontline fighter. So I understand completely why they decided to say, hey, magic no longer crits, monsters no longer crit. I understand it. And I also understand why people are pissed about it. I perfectly understand it. All right, let me get caught up on chat here. I went on a little crit rant here. Like Limbus bread. The conjure woodland beings, I think, is reasonable interpretation of the spell to choose the summoned creature right. I personally would roll for it. So, yes, you are a material girl. I am a material girl in a material world. I like the idea, Conrad. I'll speak to my ranger about it. What are the crit rules? Crit rules, no magic, no monsters. What is 5.5? Basically just the new rules that they're doing up. Now only players will be able to crit, and it only applies to weapons and unarmed strikes. So that's another thing, too, is specifically that also hinders the paladins and the rogues, which, once again, I'm okay with. I don't think it's fair that you have the paladin and the fighter in the party, and the paladin says, oh, I get a crit, now I do 120 damage right now. I don't think that's fair. And then also going on the rogue thing, what I'll say is, it's once again just like, you're already doing like a ton of damage off a single swing like no one else can do. Like, it's not fair that more often than not you get to attack with advantage, because rogues a lot of times get to attack with advantage like no one else. So it's kind of not cool. I kind of hate that crit rule. Yeah, I perfectly understand. I'm with you, NFA. I actually like it. I hope they give more monsters some critical recharge abilities that Crawford was talking about. I've got no idea what they're going to be doing with that. I've got no understanding of what that's going to be. I don't mind the fact that crits are weapons only, but I hate that my monsters can no longer crit. I agree with the assessments I first made. The new crit rule is there, so you can say, hey, we listened to your feedback and changed it. So, do I think Wizards of the Coast is smart enough to do something so egregious that it drums up a whole bunch of controversy and gets eyes on? I actually think yes as well. I do think Wizards of the Coast is tricksy enough to say, oh yeah, we're going to remove the rogue from the game and get people to all of a sudden just chime in. I think Wizards of the Coast is smart enough to make that marketing play. I think that they are. Now, what I really want to see is, instead of them putting up this flowery image of, oh yeah, we're going to introduce these hardcore rules, or these hard-coded rules, I want them to instead come up with a ton of optional rules. Instead of new DMs showing up and questioning, okay, what kind of rules do I want to homebrew? If at all, then I absolutely am okay with, them coming up with like basically the optional rules book to basically change up your campaigns. All right, gang. We just ran this one campaign. We're gonna run in the next campaign. We're gonna run the optional rule of short rest 8 hours, longer rest a week. We're gonna change up the crit rules. We're gonna change up the magic spells into magic points. Yeah, let's try it out, gang. I want that to be a regular process. I really do. I want campaigns to be fresh. I want campaigns to have new rules. I want to show up to a different table and not expect the norm. Because I don't want there to be a norm with D&D. Oh, you're talking about that? Not the monsters lose crits. DM monsters should be able to crit. They have just as much luck. Maybe if it was just the big bad. Yeah, so that goes into maybe if they have advantage on all attacks or something. I wouldn't do advantage because advantage definitely spirals completely out of control. But I would definitely do something in regards of when the monster crits, the big boss monster can crit easier, and also very important, instead of crits just being flat, just extra damage, you could take a book from Dungeon Crawl Classics. Dungeon Crawl Classics has a ton of phenomenal sets of rules on when the monster crits. Like a perfect example is I was just looking through the undead monster crit table there, and in DCC, if an undead creature crits you, like let's say like a vampire crits you, then it could potentially drain your constitution right then and there, or it could potentially make you lose vision for a little bit, or it could potentially make you lose your next turn, or X, Y, and Z. Having more there other than just does extra damage would be a lot more engaging to the game, I think. My monsters never hit frontliners. There you go. The problem with the replacement of crits with recharge abilities is that they're completely different. So if you're a DM and you're rolling recharges in the open, aren't you obliged to use it? Otherwise, the players know you're pulling their punches, and if you don't roll in the open, there's never any reason to use recharge unless your players are stomping. That comes down to a trust label at your table. Do you roll behind the screen? Do you roll in front of them? Do you go all out? Do you give them easy mode? That comes down to your table. I personally roll in the open, and I do not take it easy on my players. If a monster has a chance to kill someone, they're going to kill him. Is what it is. I personally don't think so, Conrad, but that's a very good point. But that give the rogue and the paladin best feats no glory. Like me as a pally, I get advantage and I hit 2 crits in a row. Heck yeah, I'm going to smite to the fullest extent. But once again, you make like... So right now, 5e is completely imbalanced. 5e is super duper imbalanced. And not only is the class design imbalanced, a very important aspect of the game is how the DM runs the game dictates the balance. If you run a game where you get into 1 combat encounter in a day, and then you get a long rest, then the fighter sucks. But if you get into a game where you get into 20 combat encounters before you get a long rest, then the fighter is the strongest class, without a shadow of a doubt. So how the DM runs the game is an incredibly important aspect of the balance of the game. And right now, typically, most people only run 1 to 2 combat encounters a day, and that makes the paladin overpowered. Because the paladin can pump out so much more damage than the fighter could ever dream of. Right? And say what you will of the balance of the game, but it's a matter of, does it feel good to be a player at the table when someone else gets a lot of the glory? If I'm playing a fighter and the paladin gets crits all the time and they're just smiting all the time, do I feel good because I'm not pumping out as much damage and I'm just objectively just not doing as much? That comes down to the individual table. Comes down to the individual players. I was rolling the open. Dan, respect. Yeah, I still don't know how I feel about, in all honesty, just trying to think it through. Definitely in the open. Levels 1 through 4, I whisper rolls, mainly with levels 1 and 2. Gotta run. Thanks for the DM chat. Looking good. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so it's a generally just an open and honest question about the balance of the game. Because you don't even think about it, right? You just sit down to run a game, and then you realize, looking back on things, that's objectively some of the classes didn't get to do what the classes needed to do. And it's tough, right? How do you run a game that's balanced for everybody? I to this day, I don't think there is a possible way to run a game where all classes are balanced. So, for example, being in that game where I ran it with short rest 8 hours, long rest a week. So you had the fighter be awesome because the fighter could, they essentially had infinite HP. Everyone else would constantly run out of hit dice, but the fighter, every single day, they'd have their second wind. But look at some of the other classes, right? So let's say for example, sorcerer. Let's say sorcerer could get extra spell slots because they could, instead of using their meta magic points to try and buff up their spells, they instead just pump out more spells slots. Then you got like the warlock. The warlock got exactly their 2 spells every single day. Because they just kept on getting a short rest. So but it was weird. The warlock got their 2 spells guaranteed each and every day, and they would never run out of spells. But at the same time, they couldn't be in emergency mode like the wizard, where they cast off like a bunch of spells in one day. So the balance was definitely shifted from the regular standard play. I don't think Divine Smite is OP or anything like that, but I won't lose any sleep over that ability not being able to crit. So in a vacuum where you get into 6 to 8 encounters in a day, Smite's not overpowered. It isn't, right? Like that's part of the class balance of you just deal extra damage, but dealing that extra damage makes you lose utility in other spots because you don't get the spells, right? Like that's part of the balance of the paladin. Now, where the paladin is overpowered is when you run the game where you only get into 1 combat encounter in a day, because they can pump out so much more damage than anyone else. You take a look at, over the course of those 6 to 8 encounters, how does the paladin compare to the fighter? The paladin obviously just pops off with a bunch of damage, but then they slow down because they become essentially a worse fighter, right? But that's in the marathon. In the sprint, the paladin is, of course, way better. I definitely want to run the new crit rules and playtest combat soon to get experienced opinion on it. That's the problem, too, is, one combat's not going to be able to dictate these rules. It is actually going to take a lot of playtest, like several sessions, I would say, to really get a feel for how the new playtest is actually interacting with the game. I mean, why would a paladin choose any of the smite spells over the divine smite ability? Answer: they wouldn't. There's utility. There's some of the smites, like if you know for a fact you're not going to kill them, like blinding them or banishing them, or doing X, Y, and Z, like doing some sort of special little thing. Those can be a little bit better than dealing extra damage. But 9 times out of 10, dealing damage is just the absolute correct choice in combat. Well, you can use both. That is true. But if you think about their paladin class, they are half caster and half melee. They do have to lose a spell slot for every time they smite. The smite spells can stack with the divine smite, as I read it. Conrad are the bonus actions to cast. Yep. I do not use smite spells, just the divine smite. I have to follow my oath to keep my powers. House DM, yes sir. I don't think that was the intent when they designed the paladin. Yeah. Something to consider is design intent and execution are always 2 separate issues when it comes to D&D 5e. Always separate issues, right? Sometimes they intend for one thing to happen, but in reality another thing occurs. As a further reminder, if any of y'all have any burning questions of me, you can hop into my Discord and I will drag you into a room and you can ask your burning question you have about D&D or tabletop-related games or, whatever it is that you've got a burning question for. Truth. Yeah, it can be insane to put down a Wrathful Smite, attack, extra attack, and Divine Smite both times. It's a lot of damage. I always felt that Paladins choosing to smite when the crit was broken, even without crits. So, once again, I think in the vacuum of the 6 to 8 encounters in a day, I don't think it's broken. It's a tremendous amount of damage. Yes, it absolutely is. But, once again, you're still feeling the burnout over the 6 to 8 encounters, losing all your spell slots. In the game where you run 1 combat a day, it is absolutely redonkulous. It is just not fair. One quick, simple way to fix that, the paladin in particular, like with the crit thing, is simply say, hey, instead of declaring that you're going to smite beforehand, you have to declare that you're going to smite if you hit. So that way there is no metagaming of, oh, I got a crit, I'm definitely going to smite. Either, hey, you tell me right before you roll the dice, are you going to apply smite, yes or no? That's a really quick, simple way to fix, air quote, fix the paladin smiting thing. But I mean, we could argue the same thing about a warlock being OP. They get all their spell slots back every rest, not just long rest. Yeah, so in the example of the short rest 8 hours, long rest a week, the warlock was not OP because they could not activate emergency mode. Right? So the warlock in the marathon was alongside the fighter. Not along. The fighter stood well above everyone else, in all the classes. But the warlock was kind of close. The warlock was like, I'd say probably like the second or third air quote best class in that system, because they guaranteed 2 spells a day. But at the same time, there would be combats where you need to just pump out all of your top tier spells because you need to. You need to pump out a ton of spells. And the wizards are popping off, the sorcerers are popping off. And the warlock is limited. The warlock only gets their 2 spells, and that's that. So the warlock was where the fighter was the marathon man, the warlock was good in the triathlon. Right? The sorcerer was good in the sprint, and the wizard was good in the sprint. But the warlock had a bit more versatility to it because of the use over time, but they still weren't OP in that system. NFA, thoughts on roll-to-cast systems? Personally love them. Curious about you. Roll-to-cast systems. I would want more clarity on that. I probably know what you mean, but I would need to, know, you know what I'm saying? My party does 1 to 3 encounters per day. Yeah, so Dan, with 1 to 3 encounters in a day, I can promise you that I could bring up a chart and basically say, here is objectively the best classes for a game where you get into 1 to 3 encounters in a day. And sadly, the fighter is not going to be up there. They just aren't. The fighters only start excelling once you start getting a bunch of encounters in a day and not 1 to 3. Without Eldritch Blast, the Warlock is next to useless. So that is one of my gripes with the design basis of Warlock. You essentially have a class which is nearly, absolutely just dead set on having the 1 cantrip. And then really the only Warlock that's not tied to Eldritch Blast is the Eldritch Knight, not the Eldritch Knight, oh my gosh. The one that lets you basically use swords, but use your charisma bonus. And I don't like the Warlock's class design. I think that the Warlock's class design is awesome in their modularity of getting all these different invocations. Like, that part is fun. But, at the same time, it's not fun to always be casting Eldritch Blast, and it's not always fun to, basically pick up any weapon and be able to use a charisma on it. I don't think that's, fair or fun. Yeah, but they never run out of that. But Pally is the only casters they do not get cantrips. Rangers don't get cantrips either. Rangers are also on that same boat with Paladins of they get some spells, but you're typically just using your spells to hit people anyway. DC to cast spells equals DC 10 plus spell level. Yeah, I think that they're fine. Hexblade, yes, Hexblade is the one I was thinking of. I think that spells being indicative of the challenge to overcome are great. Basically, 5e, I think is a little bit weird in that regard of oh hey, Remember that one spell, Flaming Hands? Oh, guess what? It's gonna get super hard to dodge it later on. I personally like the whole thing of, like, Flaming Hands is always, like, this super weak spell. But then guess what? Fireball. Ooh, Fireball. That's a way tougher thing to dodge, you know? I kind of like that. I like that progression over time of, like, unlocking new spells that are better versus your spells slowly getting better over time. Not really. Always harking back to Dungeon Crawl Classics. Dungeon Crawl Classics does level progression with your spells awesomely, because Flaming Hands, when you cast it at an early level, it only does like 1d6 damage. But then once you become stronger and are able to roll better dice, you can eventually get results of, oh, the Flaming Hands hits, you know, like shoots out in a 50-foot cone, and it does like 3d8 damage or 10d, you know, and basically the Flaming Hand gets not only bigger, but it gets better. I think that's a lot better progression system. Also, fun fact, for those of you that don't know, it's a little bit odd for my channel, but considering my size and considering my retention and all that fun jazz, I actually have not gotten any sponsors. There are channels out there with like 1K subs and who get like double-digit views that get sponsors, and I've never been sponsored. And there are two reasons for that. One, because I haven't taken any that have been thrown at me. But two, because when you're a YouTuber at my range, you're supposed to basically go up to companies and ask for a sponsorship. I haven't done that. And just recently, today, in fact, I got an email from a company, and they said, "Hey, do you wanna be an affiliate of ours?" And I just genuinely like paused it, and I was like, "Man, do I want to? I haven't done that before. Like, do I want to actually start doing that?" So maybe I do. Maybe I finally dip my toes into the sponsorship life. I forgot about Rangers, LFMO. LOL, some Rangers out there is like, am I a joke to you? Am I a joke to you? Do it. You know, it's odd, you know, like, I literally started YouTube with no incentive or thought that I could become as big as I am right now. I'm not the biggest, mind you. I've got 9K subs, which is pretty cool. I'm not going to lie. 9K subs is pretty dope. But I didn't think I'd get this far, especially with the content that I make. But it's cool to see the reception that I've got over the material that I made. And it's cool that some companies are... that some company was like, yeah, man, you wanna be an affiliate? You know, that sounds cool. Oh man, oh me, oh my. I'll be really happy when I hit 10K though, like. Cause like I hit 8K, like for some reason when I was like between like 5 to like 7K subs, like I was like, oh yeah, I'm pretty content. And then when I hit 8K, I was like, man, I want to hit 10K subs. Like I really want to do that. So yeah, I've been kind of thinking about doing that, and trying to push more content. Heyo! $10 from Dan the Magic Man. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us. Also, what has been your favorite big bad evil guy? First off, let me say thank you so very much for that $10. That will feed me. That will sustain me. For those of you that don't know, I am a peasant. I am not sitting in a cool gamer chair like all my YouTuber compatriots. I am sitting on the ground. Behind me, this is not a green screen. This is literally a green bed sheet that I've got hanging from my wall. I am not the most, you know, awesomest in regards of the gaming setup. So those $10 will absolutely go a long way. Thank you so very much. Thank you. What has been my favorite big bad evil guy? My favorite big bad evil guy has been a Sarek. A Serac is just the classic go-to trolley lich. And I love him for that. And my players hate him for that. And I love that my players hate him for that. You know, when it comes to big bad evil guys, they need to like just hit the party where it hurts. And a lich that is powerful than ever than life itself has so many options for ruining the party. And to put into example why the players hated Serac so much, a Serac had kidnapped their favorite henchman, or their favorite, I guess, retainer, I should say. The Serac basically just absolutely kidnapped him and got him, and absolutely just, you know, just took him away. And the party was like, "That's our guy. He's our favorite NPC." You know, and that gives you that drive to go after this guy. I love it. $2 from Fireman Breakfast. Thank you, Fireman. Thank you so much. Thank you for the $1.99. Oh man, 2 donations. That is that's spicy. I love it. Thank you all. Dope character in Ready Player One. Also, I sadly haven't watched Ready Player One. I didn't get around to seeing that movie. I don't get around to seeing many movies, in fact, sadly. I'm about to DM a lich for an upcoming adventure. Any advice? Don't have them be stupid. So there is this natural tendency for us as DMs to try and basically sometimes your DM tendency is to cry, but sometimes it's a DM tendency to try to make the monster beatable. But I'm here to tell you that liches are so smart. Liches aren't just these mad wizards, right? Liches are these wizards that have overcome death itself, and they are presumably older than all of the party combined. Don't have liches play dumb. Don't have liches, you know, stand there in melee. Don't have liches be in a room with no traps. Don't have liches have no out. Don't have liches lose. Don't let liches lose. The only reason a lich will lose is because they get unlucky. And most important of all, because the players get lucky. And for that'll make it that much more rewarding when your players beat that lich. If you play up a lich and the lich just stands there and goes, "Oh, hey, power word kill here. Okay, finger of death there," and just stands in the center of the room in a blank 25 by 25 square grid, that's boring. You know what is cool? The lich standing on top of a pillar that is surrounded by necrotic lava, and along the walls are turrets that shoot forth necrotic energy, and your players have to charge through a room that is filled with these turrets that have necrotic energy, and your players can either choose to just power through it, or they can choose to try and deactivate the towers by activating some switches along the side. All the meanwhile, the lich is shooting out spells here and there. And once your players get to the end of the hall, then the lich snaps their fingers and teleports back to the start of the entrance, and your players have to crawl all the way back. All the meanwhile, the lich is shooting out spells again. That is engaging. That is memorable. That is true to the character. Make liches as impactful and as important as they should be. Don't watch it, read the book, or listen to the audiobook. It's 1,000 times better because D&D was cut from the movie, but in the book it is a huge aspect. That's actually cool. I need to read it. What if I'm dumb? Well, I find the trick is, one, I'm going to assume that you're not dumb. But same, Conrad. Playing a smart big bad guy as dumb guy is very anxiety inducing. Dan knows what I'm talking about. JK, I'm sure you're a smart dude. So, what I'll say is, sometimes your players will accidentally give you some fantastic advice. Sometimes your players will inadvertently say out loud, "Oh, that would be terrible if the lich counter spelled me." It would be terrible if the Lich moved now. It would be terrible if, the floor opened up. Sometimes your players accidentally give you ammunition. And sometimes it's such an awesome thing of like, oh yeah, they're totally going to do that, baby. And then your player's like, oh, I should have known. Oh, dang it. That creates one of those fun little scenarios. You can never let them in on that you're using what they're saying against them, because then they'll be too afraid to say anything. You have to make it feel like it was actually planned. And that's some sort of illusion that you got to kind of create on your own there. College dropout, baby. I'll tell you what, college is not an indication of intelligence. Intelligence is a huge, wide factoring degree of number of things, and college is not one of them. College is literally just a test of your, basically just your, your willingness to spend a ton of money, first off here. And secondly, it is just a test of, regurgitating information. College is in no way, shape, or form a true showcasing of intelligence. I can promise you, I have met hobos that are smarter than, people that are literally homeless. I've met smarter homeless people than someone who graduated with bachelors and stuff. I can promise you that. Oh yeah, just like Kanye West, you're in good company. Thanks for the advice. No problem. Like I said, I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to tell it like it is. I'm here to tell you what you need to hear. Because telling you what you need to hear is far more important than telling you what you want to hear. Yeah, great advice. Maybe being smart is just about opening those ears. It's once again, intelligence is a number of factors, right? And I'm saying this in our real world, not in D&D. In D&D, intelligence is defined as X, Y, and Z, right? In our real world, intelligence is a huge number of factors, and there is no one level or one degree of intelligence. You can meet two equally intelligent people, but they have different, mindsets and views and opinions and et cetera, et cetera. But I will say, yeah, learning just to listen is an important one. Listening will grant you great insights into the world, and also, more importantly, to the people that inhabit it. Simply just listening to your players at the table will, but I don't want to hear it. Listening to your players at the table will grant you fantastic insights on how they run, on how they perceive the world. As a friendly reminder, even though we all are human beings, even though we all see the sky, we see it differently, right? Whenever you go to run a game of D&D, a game that's fueled by imagination, you'll come to discover that people have different forms of imagination. When I go to describe the room to 4 different people, they're going to perceive that room 4 different ways. And that's fine. What's the coolest skeleton for a Lich? I'm thinking an Aarakocra Lich would look dope. That would look hella dope, actually. So that's another thing, too, is I think a lot of people default to human Lich because, you just see the art. And, it's like, oh, yeah, it's the Lich of a human. But there's a lot of cool other Liches, like Lizard Folk Lich. Like, that's dope right there. Lizard Folk Lich, that's badass. Aarakocra Lich, that's dope. Insert all those. Thanks, NFA. Enjoyed listening to the spiel while I made dinner. Keep it up, comrade. Gotta run. See ya, House DM. See ya. Totally joking. This is a lot of great information. I really appreciate it so much. See ya, House. Bye, House. Yeah, and mind you, while I'm sitting here on my soapbox, regurgitating out all this information, there's something important, is I'm not the succubus Lich. There you go. That'll be sure to get some players going. But it's important to realize that I'm not the authoritative figure and voice on everything and anything. I'm just some guy that just so happens to run a bunch of games. Like, I've ran for hundreds of people. Like, my credentials, if you could call it that, for giving out advice would be that I, make a bunch of YouTube videos, and that I've ran for hundreds of people, and that I've ran hundreds of games, and that I've done this for this long, Those are my credentials. But I'm here to tell you, literally just talking to anybody about your questions in regarding anything in tabletop role-playing gamedom, anybody can give you solid advice, right? Sometimes you have a question about how do you deal with a certain problem player. Like, it doesn't take me to tell you that. Like, sometimes it can be as simple as just asking one other person. And I think that is unfortunate that there's a lot of times where people feel the need that they can only come talk to, like, someone of authority, as it were. They can only talk to someone who has the credentials. That's not the case. Be open about your questions. Be open about, what you need done. Sometimes you have a question about how to run the D&D a certain way. Sometimes you have a question about how you go about talking to a player about a certain issue at hand. Sometimes you have these questions, and sometimes it can feel hard to, find the right answer. Just talk to people. People will guide you in the best direction that they can. Most of the time, anyway. And that's the important part, is don't talk to scummy people about it. But, find the right people. Oh, goodness gracious. I was originally going to do this tomorrow, but I will be hecka busy tomorrow and will not be able to do this tomorrow. And then, like, I think by tomorrow I'll have a more concrete plan of my schedule, and then I'll be able to run more one-shots for my community. So if you are interested in playing in any one-shots by me, then feel free to join my Discord, which I will provide a link for right now. Everyone's skill set is different. I run intense hardcore one-shots, but I have no idea how to start a campaign. But a friend came to me for help for a one-shot. They have ran 50-some campaigns. There you go. There you go. You are the one-shot master. It's also very important to recognize your, like, flaws and skills. Play into your skills and try and improve your flaws. You never ran you never ran a monster a certain kind of way. Like, try to improve it. You never played in like a sandboxy kind of game. Then improve it. So it's always important to keep on improving on your crafts. You're never going to be the best you can be, but keep chasing that goalpost. Melinda, one-shots are tough. I ran 2 and they require way more intense prep. That's the funny thing is I always hear a lot of people always start off with like, oh yeah, just before you run a campaign, start a one-shot or 2. But sometimes one-shots can be harder than campaigns, for sure. If you want a full, well-rounded one-shot, then that can be a lot more intensive than running a standard session in a campaign. Right, because sometimes the campaign kind of just builds itself. Sometimes your players are, just constantly filling in a lot of the empty space. But in a one-shot, there usually is no empty space. In a one-shot, you typically are filling everything. When did I start? I started at 4. Oh my gosh, I've already been going how long now? Sweet goodness gracious. Okay, I've been going a long time. Yeah, I can keep people going for 4 to 10 hours, but planning a year-long campaign makes me stress my OCD go nuts. Yeah, what I am here to tell you is sometimes running a campaign is absolutely fantastic because your players will fill in the gaps. And if you have players that do not fill in the gaps, then you probably shouldn't just run a campaign for them. That's what I'd say. When you're running a campaign and you tell them, hey, here's the world, you're exploring the world, like they explore the world, right? And that's great. And they explore it how they want to explore it sometimes, and sometimes you lay down some tracks and you say, hey, these are the tracks that the adventure lies on. Run along them, right? And whatever the case may be, so long as you get players that are fully on board with the campaign that you're running, it just runs smoothly. I always hear this talk about, oh, DMs need to do so much, but the players need to put in the equal amount of effort. Like, yeah, the players aren't doing prep. The players aren't making their maps or anything. Players aren't making new stat blocks or anything. But the players need to show up with a winning mindset to win D&D. And the only way you win D&D is by having fun. Sometimes people do not show up to D&D with a winning mindset, and it steers off course. Oh my goodness. Um. Hmm. I give as much as my players do. What I mean is I will prep and run the heck out of an encounter, but only if my players are working and engaged with it. Yeah, I mean, if you're spending so much time and effort into trying to make a enjoyable experience and your players just shrug it off and say, oh yeah, I mean, whatever, then you're going to start dumbing down your experience, and then it just leads into the self-collision thing of the players aren't giving me good, incentive. I'm not going to give them good experience because the experience isn't as good. They're not going to have an incentive, and it just spirals down. But if it's the opposite, if it's, oh, hey, they're reacting greatly, then you're going to make greater stuff. And because you make greater stuff, then they're going to react greatly. And then you create awesome memories together. What's the max amount of players you'd be willing to DM for? When does it get to be too much in your opinion? So I'm going to assume that you mean 5e. Because when it comes to different tabletop role-playing game systems, it always varies. There are some systems where I can have a lot of players, and there's some where you can only have a little. When it comes to 5e in particular, my record is 11 players at a table, and that was a truly horrible experience. That absolutely freaking sucked. What I would DM for a regular amount is my ideal campaign would be 5 players. I find that beyond 5 players, 5e just grind. Because 1, combat has to be exponentially harder than 4. Like, the difference between 5 PCs and 4 PCs is night and day. It is astronomical. But beyond just the whole combat coming to a grind, it's also the fact that I want to give everyone the time to shine. And the more players you have, the less time there is to shine. And that frickin' sucks. It's not fair to so many people that they just have to sit there and wait for so long. And also, very importantly, is the more people you have, the more likely you have people that, like, cover the same niche or cover the same like thing. So like that could be in combat. Oh, if you have like 10 players at the table, then it's more than likely that you've got, 2 heavy spellcasters, or you've got 2 frontline fighters, or you've got 2 X, Y's, and Z's, right? But then also in the narrative sense, the more players you have, the more likely you are to have PCs that have a similar sort of like take. You could have 2 of the boisterous adventurers, and then you could have 2 of the, I don't know, the brooding, people, so on and so forth. So the more people you have, the worse it gets. So my max amount that I'm willing to DM for a regular campaign would be 5. When it comes to one-shots, I'm okay with 6. And then once again, when it comes to different gaming systems, it's entirely different. Depends on the system. I mean, if they show up on time and try to RP and think about it, I have a DM for I have DM for 4 to 6. I played an 18-person game. See, an 18-person game sounds like a nightmare. That sounds like an absolutely abysmal time. That sounds like no fun gets accomplished at all whatsoever. I couldn't imagine. I just couldn't imagine. Yeah, and it was 24 hours round robin. Ugh. Call me old, but I just don't like staying up 24 hours just to play a game. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I gotta be somewhere, I will stay awake for 24 hours, but I don't want to. The first campaign I played in with 8 people, and it fell apart after 2 sessions. Yeah. I couldn't imagine running a campaign that is filled with the idea of trying to make people feel special when... How can you possibly stand out in that crowd? It'd be so tough. And also, 8 people 5e combat is terrible. 8 people 5e combat is terrible. I was on bed rest from COVID, so it was perfect. Well, there you go. You just chilling there, waiting for your turn. You go, perfect. That's another thing, too, is the more players you have, the less you care about the other players, right? Like, how can you possibly... Like, if you are at a table with 8 players, how in the world, during combat, could you possibly sit there and just stare intently at, the 7 other players' turns, and then, of course, the DM's turn? There's no way you could sit there just fully intent, being like, oh, this is so riveting. There's no way. Got an hour nap each turn. That sounds terrible. That sounds so boring. Oh my gosh. That sounds so boring. Oh my gosh. The whole point of D&D is to be an engaging cooperative experience. And unfortunately, just the more people you have, the less engaging it'll be. Now, what I'll say is that does come down to 5e in particular. Something to remember. In original D&D, those people were playing regularly with like 10 people at the table. Regularly. And you know what's the funny part? If I were to run original D&D right now with 10 players, I promise you a combat with 10 players would go quicker than a 4 PC combat in 5e. And you might be questioning why that is. How is that possible? There are several factors. 2 big ones I'll go ahead and cover real quickly is, 1, there is no waiting for your turn. In original D&D, you have the player's turn and you have the monster's turn. All the monsters go, all the PCs go. So you, as a group, you all immediately coordinate with each other really quickly. Like, okay, all the fighters are going to move to here, and then the wizard's going to move there, and boom. Number 2, the reason why combat went so smoothly and quickly is because you just had less features. The fighter doesn't have action surge. The fighter doesn't have second wind. When you don't have any features on your character sheet, you just have your attack, you know, and whatever magical item you have, which typically is like very mundane and simple. You're not thinking, and you're just simply doing. $5 from Dan the Magic Man. Thank you so very much. I got to bounce. Thanks for the advice, and let's get you to 10K. I just subbed today and can't wait to see more. Thank you, Dan the Magic Man. Thank you so very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am really looking forward and hoping to getting to 10K subs because that would be badass. That would be awesome. I really, really want to see that. So thank you so much. Thank you for the dono there. That goes a long way. I promise you. it absolutely does. It wasn't you had to be there. It was fun. The DM was amazing. Keep the players engaged. He does this about twice a year. We got one action and movement. Here's the thing though. I'm just like thinking from a DM perspective here. I just couldn't imagine having, because like as you know, as a player you can kind of shirk, but as a DM you got to be sitting there, you got to be talking a lot, you got to be moving a lot. You know what my most fondest memories of D&D come from? My most fondest memories of being a DM is doing nothing. My most fond memories of being a DM comes from my players engaging with each other. And specifically, I'll say the characters engaging with each other. Those are my fond memories. I love when I'm not involved in the current situation, but I set up the situation in hand, right? Like, I got them to... I put this group together, and I created a world, and I created these scenarios, and the characters experience them, and then they converse with each other about their experiences. And then I get to sit there and I get to reap the benefit. I get to reap the reward of all that hard work accomplished. You know, that's phenomenal. My most fondest memories aren't from some combat where I'm, you know, shouting and yelling. My most fond memories aren't necessarily from, you know, playing the lovable NPC or the hateable NPC. My most fond memories are watching the players truly enjoy the game with each other. And I get to sit there, you know, behind the screen, and I'm just smiling. You know, like that's a phenomenal feeling. I'm sure that DM has that, I'm sure. But setting that up sounds like a pain. I could not imagine doing that. It sounds like it could absolutely be cool, but I couldn't imagine the strife. Oh boy. Alrighty. Well, I am semi-hungry. And by semi-hungry, I mean I'm like starving. So, for those of you who haven't already, join the Discord. I'll be running a bunch of one-shots. I'll be regularly hosting this Sending Stone, pending title here. And yeah, just come on down. I'm running a bunch of things. I'm talking to people. It's a fun time. I want to do more of this. So I'll be around for another 10 minutes. If anyone has any burning questions, for those of you that have anything they want to talk about, feel free to question. Feel free to pose your question. I'm here to answer. I'm here to provide. I'm here to lend an ear, to give you insight. I'm here to help out, because that's what my channel was created for. My channel was created to help people out. It was great, but like I said, you had to be there. I imagine. It's definitely a crowded table, as it were. So yeah, 10 more minutes, and then I got to Vominos. Oh boy! For those of you who haven't been keeping up on my YouTube channel, I've been posting up a bunch of shorts, and I'm going for a sarcastic sort of like, not like, serious kind of vibe. You know what I'm saying? For some of them, but some people aren't necessarily picking that up. I just recently got a comment on my DM toolkit video, which seemed to pop off somewhere recently. What do I think of the new playtest rule where you can get inspiration anytime you crit with a D20 test? I think that meta currency should not be referenced in the standard rules. I think 5e's meta currency should be its own home discussed thing. I think implementing the meta currency of inspiration into the game is just not great because, one, it gets confusing when you have bardic inspiration, but two, also, I just don't like it. Like the whole thing of like, oh, everyone starts a session with 1, and you don't get to keep it, and you only get it when you roll a d20 or nat 20, and I don't like that in particular. I think D&D's 5e's meta currency should be a bit different. What games do you plan on running, and what do you run with? So the games I plan on running are, I'm running Radiant Citadel, Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. I'm also running some Dungeon Crawl Classic 0th level one-shots where you play as peasants. You're playing as 0th level characters. And I'm also planning on running a few more things. I'm planning on running some sort of West Marches game out of my Discord. And I typically run using Roll20 with the tokens and the dice rolling. And I typically use Discord as the voice to keep things simple. I do plan on running some other things as well. I do want to run some Call of Cthulhu one-shots. I think it could be really fun. I do want to run some who knows, beyond Call of Duty. Oh, Mothership. I want to run some Mothership one-shots. I think that'd be really fun. What am I going to eat? I think I'm going to eat some chicken. Chicken sounds good right now. I'm going to eat some chicken because I am starving. You should do white people tacos? Heck no. For those of you that don't know, I live in California, so thankfully I do not have to subjugate myself to white people tacos. I can get real tacos. Plus, I make good tacos myself, which are not white people tacos. I gave out inspiration for cool out-of-the-box ideas for my players. Yeah, and I think a meta currency should really be something that's like unique to each table. And also, very importantly, I think that D&D should also write out some fun ways that you can have, inspiration. I think that I think codifying it into the base rules is a bad idea. But I think having it as the optional thing of like, oh, hey, here's some ideas on how you can give inspiration. I think that'd be cool. Yay for California, I'm on the Central Coast. Heck yeah. I'm in California. Well, wouldn't you know, like a quarter of all Americans are in California, so not really too surprising, really. A lot of people from California, go figure. I only do white people tacos when I'm broke and have 5 packs of tortillas and a ton of hamburgers. Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. Yeah, doesn't it kind of make the inspiration game too crowded? If the feats are what they are, you can get like 2 humans and a musician and the whole party has inspiration. Inspiration's a little bit funky. What I'll say, like both the name of it, like why would they have inspiration as the meta currency and then bardic inspiration as the like the class feature? It's so weird. I don't get it. I am Midwest. Hey, Shout out to the Midwest crew. I feel like a lot of my players are from the Midwest. I've ran for a lot of people, mind you. I've ran for a lot of different people. My inspiration is a reroll, that's it. Yeah, in and out, in and out. I just had in and out the other day. It was pretty good. My inspiration, what I do is I allow you to grant advantage or negate a disadvantage, but you must declare it before the roll. That's what I typically do. It's because we are mid and the chillest peoples ever. I'll take your word for it. Swampy Maryland represents. Woo woo. Good old swamp. Swamp's a. I live with the lizard folk down here. You know, swamp's one of those underappreciated biomes. It's funny, like, you know, depending on who you talk to, there's like a lot of biomes that people just straight up like have never experienced firsthand, right? Like most SoCal people have never been to a swamp. You know, most most insert whatever here haven't been in snow. Most people haven't been in, you know, all these different sorts of biomes, and it's interesting. Like I remember, like I was running Icewind Dale Rime with the Frost Maiden, and I was running for some Floridians, and it was like literally like they were like I was running it, and it was like 100 degrees for him, and it was really funny, like talking about like, oh yeah, you know, the blistering snow and cold is terrible, and then it's like, oh, I'm you know, right now I'm like sweating right now. It's flat and weather is different every 5 minutes. I'm a swampless man. So sometimes it is hard to, like, if you've never experienced these biomes, sometimes it is hard to like kind of evoke the sense of that place. Like there's some things you miss. Like only people that have been in swamps can kind of, you know, personify the stench and the sound, you know. I love snow. I mean, I'm personally, I'm a fan of heat myself. Like I like me the occasional snow, but I wouldn't like to live in snow. I like me some heat. It was a pretty warm summer this time around. We had consistent like 90-degree days. Starting to chill off a little bit, unfortunately, but so it is the end of summer. I have the snow. It always comes with a thick layer of ice. Hate snow. Thick layer of ice would suck. That's for sure. I definitely wouldn't want to deal with ice all the time, especially driving around, because like I can only imagine how many people are crashing all the time because of ice. Couldn't imagine. But if there is no further last hard-hitting questions, I think we're going to call it there, because at this point I am actually starving. I haven't eaten in like 7 hours. Alrighty. So I'll have to write some questions down for next time. I'd like to pipe up on voice, but I'm shy. Well, one, I'm welcoming. You're free to talk. You're free to talk. But two, yeah, feel free to write down questions, and I'll be hosting one of these soon. Like I said, I think by tomorrow I'll have a more concrete plan of my idea of my schedule for the upcoming weeks. So I'll be sure to post to you all and keep you scheduled. Check out my Discord. Check out my YouTube. Check out my Patreon if you want to support me. Check out all those things. I also have YouTube. Like YouTube allows I've got like memberships thing. But I haven't gotten any members yet, so I'll have to check the YouTube membership thing out. Like I plan on like having like cool like icons if you're like a member for my stream and all that. I'll be definitely doing that at some point. But that is going to do it for me, so thank you so much for watching. Thank you all for listening. Thanks to the amazing questions. Thanks for the participation. Thanks for all the lurkers. I know there's lurkers out there, and guess what? Even just lurking, you're doing me, you're doing great stuff just by lurking. So thank you so very much, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one. See